All right. If everyone can please take a seat, we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Thank you so much for coming and welcome to the SHAKTI annual meeting. This is our third annual meeting, our second in person, and for the second year in a row, the weather has really cooperated. So we'll try to hold your attention here, but it really is beautiful over there. And thank you. We know people came from far and wide, so we appreciate all of the out-of-towners for taking time and spending the morning with us. And thank you for coming last night to our welcome reception. Big shout out to Igor Sill, our Titan and LP, for providing the amazing wine. It was absolutely delicious, and thanks for being our just mentor and supporter and partner really from day one. So really appreciate having you here. For those of you who don't know me, which I think most people do, I'm Liz Harrow, partner at SHAKTI along with Cable. And I joined SHAKTI 2 years ago after about a decade plus career on Wall Street, where I was in equity research and at a tech accelerator and fund. So very excited to be here today. And if you look around the room, you'll notice that SHAKTI is all about community. So we have not just our investors, but also our founders, which I think is a little, uncommon to have founders come to annual meetings. So thank you guys for being here. And we just really want to encourage everyone to network and engage and get to know each other. And to help facilitate the networking, we have a directory of attendees. So if you use your phone to scan this QR code, you'll see everyone who's in the room. And if there's anyone who you want to meet after today, just feel free to reach out to me or Cable, and we can help to make any introductions. So it's been a busy year since we gathered in the Presidio. A lot has happened with SHAKTI. We've welcomed new portfolio companies. We're excited to tell you about kind of the evolution of the fund. We have some exciting news about what we've been up to. We've grown our team. We have a new team member, Cindy Landau, who has been interning with us for the past year, but is joining full time after she graduates from college in a couple of months. So we've grown our SHAKTI family. On a personal note, as I mentioned to folks who were there last night, I've grown my family as well. So I just had a baby boy 3 months ago. Thank you. So it's just been a really exciting year, and we'll tell you a little bit about what's going on today in terms of the agenda. So let me just go back a page. This is the agenda, and you can also, again, use your phone to scan the QR code if you want to have the agenda up throughout the day as well. So I think probably two themes that you'll see throughout the day. Not surprising, AI is one of them. So we'll be talking about what are our thoughts on AI, what are we investing in the space, what are our portfolio companies doing, and what's our outlook for the future. And secondly, we'll be talking about the outlook in the financing environment. So obviously it's been more challenging. We're out of the zero interest rate environment. It's been challenging for companies to raise money. So what have our companies been doing? What's been going on in the IPO market, and what do we expect going forward? So those two themes will resonate throughout. Soon we'll turn to a fund update, and we'll have some time for Q&A, and we'll also leave plenty of time for Q&A during lunch as well. And then we'll have a conversation on AI featuring a few of our portfolio company CEOs and moderated by Brian Nowak, who's a former colleague from Morgan Stanley and their lead tech equity research analyst. And then after a short break, we'll have a conversation on the Next IPO Cycle with several experts in the space. And we'll hear from a few of our portfolio companies on what have they been up to in the past year, how are they managing and growing in this new finance environment. And then we'll have a fireside chat with one of our titans, Dave Gerard, and then we'll have lunch and Q&A. So please stick around. One thing also to mention in terms of logistics, we'll have several breaks throughout the day for networking, but please also stop by. We have a tea shop set up over on the right-hand side here by the fireplace. As you know, SHAKTI is all about supporting entrepreneurs in every fashion, and Aroma Tea Shop is a local tea company in San Francisco. So you can actually make your own tea blend and have it here or take it home with you. So just a little treat. It's run by a husband and wife team, but today is a father-daughter team doing it today. So in terms of logistics, everything today is off the record. We want people to feel comfortable speaking freely. If you want to take a quote from anyone afterward, just please make sure you reach out to them. And if you need anyone's contact information, reach out to us and we can help too. We'll make the slides available to folks as well. So excited to tell you about what we've been working on. I know it's been 3 years since we launched SHAKTI through end of 2023 for Fund 1. I think you'll hear that we're on pace with what we set out to do. So we've invested in 29 portfolio companies. We've deployed about 2/3 of the capital, and we've grown our team. So we've made a lot of progress. Excited to tell you about it in our Fund 1 update. But first, we thought it would be helpful to give a little bit of a refresher on who we are, sort of to remind ourselves why we're all gathered together and why we're all partners in SHAKTI. So I'll turn it over to Keval to walk you through a little refresher of us.
Good morning, everyone. And Liz, welcome back. I am very relieved that you're back here. We've definitely missed you. And Matthew is off the charts on the cuteness scale, so we are a very happy family right now. Welcome, everybody. We thought 3 years into our journey, it's a good time to take a step back and remind ourselves why we came together, all of us, in this partnership. And I think to start off, the first question that we asked ourselves 3 years ago is, why does the world need another venture firm when there are hundreds and maybe thousands of firms out there? And we thought very hard about that question, and our conclusion was that venture really is about serving two customers. On the one hand, we have entrepreneurs for whom we need to provide great service from zero to IPO. And on the other hand, we have investors, LPs, for whom we need to provide better returns than they can get elsewhere. These are two very obvious goals, and yet many venture models struggle to achieve both of them at the same time, because typically what has meant to provide full service is that you need big funds and big fees that drag down returns. We feel that we have found a solution to this conundrum, and let's see how we do that at SHAKTI. First and foremost, we are about small funds, investing at a very early stage in entrepreneurs who are building category-leading companies and provide them with world-class mentors. If companies are like people, we want to meet companies when they're in kindergarten and want to stay with them all the way through college, which would be the IPO. It takes about roughly 10 years, which is about right. By the way, it's never too early for us to meet with founders. We met founders before they even had companies. For example, we met Sarah and Colin in college when they were thinking about starting something. So we're early stage investors. Our focus is on the reimagination of very large global habits that are getting reimagined with new technology. So think of areas like commerce, mobility, productivity, and climate, things that impact billions of people on a daily basis. And then within that, we have a full stack approach where we invest both in the application and the infrastructure layers, with the observation that typically wherever there are new gold mines being created, there are also new picks and shovels companies. And there's a symbiotic relationship between those two. And if we can spot that, we want to take 2 bites at the apple, invest in the full stack, and deliver more value in the same vintage. Now, this approach has worked well for us in this fund, but also in prior funds. We've been doing this same strategy for over a decade now. These are some examples of companies where we invested early, and we had some outlier outcomes, including a couple of IPOs, which despite all the noise in the venture business, IPOs are actually really hard and rare. There are many firms and VCs who go through the entire career without a single IPO. So we've been lucky. There are 3 key drivers to our strategy. First, we have to get to companies early. Second, we have to have an investment lens that when we meet entrepreneurs at an early stage, we have to recognize that there is something here before it's obvious. And then third, obviously, is our Titan platform, which we'll talk about in a minute. How do we get access to founders early on? Well, that's all about you guys, our community. You are all great people. You know other great people. When those people start great companies, you let them know about us. We get the first call usually, and we give them their first million. And that formula has worked very well for us. Some of you have done a really great job at that. Others, you will do it soon. So we appreciate that, and thank you. Keep the deal flow coming. The second thing is our investment lens. And there are 2 things on here. So let's focus on the first item, which is when we look at a company, the very first thing we ask ourselves is there are 7 billion people on the planet 24 hours in a day. What's the size of this use case? How many people and how often would they use it? The second question is about the founder. Can the founder go all the way? We recognize that as investors, we are backseat passengers in the car. The founders are the drivers, and we want our drivers to finish the race all the way and not abandon in the middle. So it's very important for us. We like founder-driven companies. founders will stay all the way through the long journey. And then the third question is, why now? If it's a big use case, somebody's already probably serving it, so why should a startup get a chance to break in? Usually it's a technology inflection point, which is what's happening with AI and robotics right now, or it's a societal change where a new generation of users, for example, Gen Z, are entering the market and asking for things in a better, faster, cheaper way, perhaps in a more sustainable way. So there is some catalyst that's giving the startup opportunity, and it's important to know why that is. And then the last thing is the financial ROI. Can we make at least 10x, if not more, from the time we enter? So those are the things we look at. Notice that I said use case. I didn't say TAM. And that's an important distinction for us. We believe, and we have seen, that companies that create categories typically address a use case that's quite large, but that doesn't yet have the dollars associated with them in terms of spend. And as these companies lower the friction, that latent demand translates into dollar TAM. Two classic examples of this were Canva in 2012 when we invested from a different fund for design, and the Real, which was in the consignment. Both of these were large pent-up demands, but there's a lot of friction. As these companies lowered the friction, the TAM became huge, and those companies became the category leaders in their respective segments. And then lastly is, once we invest, we'll talk more about this a little bit later, but the key premise here is that we believe that entrepreneurs are like Olympic athletes who are trying to win the gold medal. And if you're an Olympic athlete, you don't go to your local yoga studio. What you do is you get an Olympic coach. Ideally, somebody who's done it before. And that person stays with you for 6, 8, 10 years to help you get to the pinnacle of your profession. So our objective here is to match founders with coaches who have done it before. And you'll hear a lot about that throughout the day today. So where does that all put us in the venture landscape? Small funds investing early in great founders with great coaches. We think that we're in the artisanal business. We're not in the factory business. And there are two dimensions to looking at it. On the one hand, we have the size of the fund. If you're an LP, you put $1 into a venture fund, you expect $3 to $4 back. Typically, that would happen more likely in smaller funds than in bigger funds. And if you're an entrepreneur and you want that personalized, customized help with a partner who's going to stay with you for the long run, you can have the bootcamp, one-size-fits-all factory approach, or you can have the customized SHAKTI approach. So this is a self-selection thing. LPs and founders who prefer our way choose us. And so far, we've been very lucky to have support from all of you in the room. Put it all together, I think what we are trying to do in a nutshell is provide Nordstrom service to founders at Kmart prices to LPs. And if we can do that, I think then we're ushering this fourth wave of venture capital in this beautiful industry that is within started 40 miles from here, that's been around for 50 years. It has evolved quite a bit. And we think that we bring that next phase of evolution where we can sort of square the circle that's really been challenging for many models. And the last thing I'll say is, why now? Why do we start a new venture firm right now? I think on that front, we're very, very lucky that we have two simultaneous tailwinds. We have a new economic cycle, and we have a new technology cycle. Economically, if you think about the peak IPOs, they're very predictable. The frequency of peak IPOs is about 7 to 8 years. The last one was in 2021 when we had over 1,000 IPOs, including some crazy SPACs. So the next one will be towards the end of this decade. And that's perfect for us. If you look at our early stage portfolio as these companies mature, we're going to time it almost perfectly. In terms of the macro environment, interest rates are high. They're likely to stay high or maybe even go higher. And there's a direct correlation between high rates and low startup valuations. The only way to make money is to buy low and sell high, and this is a great time to buy low. And then the last thing would be that for the last 40 years, every couple of years, some really smart LP puts out a report using all kinds of data that essentially says the same thing, which is that if you really want to make money in venture, it's where the small funds are. So that's who we are. This is why we do the way we do it. And with that, I'm going to invite Liz up here. The one thing I'll say is this working 3 years into it? You as our customers will be the ultimate judge of that. So far, and again, it's very early. It's like having a kid in third grade when you're looking for a college, ultimately the college outcome. It's early to say, but so far, we think the plan is working, and Liz is going to provide more data on that.
All right, so as Keval mentioned, it's early, but we're after 3 years in, the end of 2023, we're on track with where we set out to be. So $28 million AUM fund. We said we would invest in about 30 companies over the first few years of the fund. We've invested in 29 companies. The median cost of those investments is $250,000 for initial check size, and we've deployed about 2/3 of the fund's capital. And we have 9 companies that have 12 companies that have over $1 million in revenue, and that was up from 9 companies last year, so making progress. In terms of the portfolio IRR, it's 13.8% at the end of last year, and the net IRR is 5.7%. And just for reference, the portfolio IRR is more of a straight look at the value creation versus the cost, and the net IRR is net of initial startup costs, any carried interest and fees. And so there's a larger delta in between those two numbers just because we're still 3 years in, but eventually those numbers are expected to, the delta should converge a little bit. Diving a little bit deeper into our portfolio, and we have several of our founders here today. We have an incredibly diverse portfolio. So Keval mentioned trends in AI and robotics. We are absolutely right there with over 50% of our investments in these sectors, and we are diversified across the application and infrastructure layers in terms of the end use case. We're diversified across gender, with over 40% of our CEOs are female. And so we are, yeah, thank you. So diversified across deals as well as where our dollars are going. Diversified geographically, Fund 1 is in 4 continents. And any way you slice the portfolio from a diversity aspect, we're seeing value creation, whether it's by sector, by gender, by end market. We don't have concentration in just one deal. All of the deals across these different areas are creating value, and so we can see the value is greater than the cost. And as an early stage fund, we invest in companies when sometimes they have no revenue at all. And so for us, a key metric is to look at how are companies progressing in terms of coming into revenue and hitting their milestones. And so when we invest at first, usually companies are kind of in the top of the funnel with no revenue. And if we're doing something right, hopefully the companies will make it through the funnel and eventually come into even more revenue. So today we have 69% of our companies and 89% of cost have some revenue. That's up from about 52% of companies and in the high 70s of cost having revenue last year. So making progress. And as you can see, we have 4 companies that are over the $10 million in revenue bucket. And that's some are at 10, some are at 20, some are at even higher. So we're happy to see that companies are hitting their milestones and progressing through the funnel. We invest very early, so we have some great follow-on investors in our portfolio companies, but we've come in at a much lower cost basis just given we try to meet founders extremely early in the process. And have to mention, being completely transparent, are the companies that have been failures in the portfolio. So we've had a total cost of companies that have failed is less than 1% of committed capital. Obviously, over time, we expect this to increase, but today this is where it stands, and we've had 3 companies shut down and 1 discretionary write-off. Mentioned the team a little bit. You know me and Keval, and I introduced Sydney, who's our new team member. I think we have a very diverse team, but we're very complementary skill sets with Silicon Valley experience as well as finance experience. And now with Sydney, we have our new Gen Z lens. And our team is augmented by our amazing SHAKTI fellows, who are an extension of our team. They act as our eyes and ears on the ground for what's coming next in new technology. Adriel, Natasha, Saludin, extremely diverse backgrounds ranging from consumer to AI to SaaS, and just are extremely helpful to our team and have GP carry. Our LPAC represents our 3 key constituencies from an investor perspective, our institutional investors, our family offices, as well as individuals. So Mark, Roland, and Suzanne are our LPAC, and we come to them from time to time to get advice or raise any fun questions to them. Big thank you to our extended team. Keval and I, it's a small team day to day, but we couldn't do it without several of our partners, who I won't mention all of them, but they're here on the screen. And just want to give a special shout out to Nancy Alonso and Otis Brown and team for making the annual meeting happen. So thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. And thanks for your support. So a lot of times people ask us how they can help. We absolutely love our community to get involved. I think the number one way that you can be helpful is just to help us help our portfolio companies. Everyone here has such amazing networks and experience. And so when we see our titans connect with our portfolio companies, that's where the real magic happens. And so if you want to get more involved, we would absolutely love that. And of course, if there's anyone in your network who's interested in venture, either an investor or startup perspective, Cable and I always would love to talk to them. And of course, attend our events. So we have events in both San Francisco as well as New York. So if we haven't seen you at one in the past year, we look forward to seeing you in some of our upcoming events. And some news on the portfolio. So we've been talking about Fund 1, but we've also launched Fund 2. We did our first close on Fund 2 in December of 2023. And the size of the fund was a little bit more than the entire size of our Fund 1. Big thank you to our institutional and family office investors who participated in Fund 2. We've already kind of hit the ground running, making 3 investments. We tease them a little bit here with some of our companies, but more to come on those. And we plan to do the second close on Fund 2 in June. So if we haven't yet spoken and you're interested, please let us know. But more to come on Fund 2 in the future. You should have all received your K1s as of end of year, and we'll do about 2 to 3 capital calls left for 2024. And of course, save the date for our next annual meeting. So that's a little bit about kind of where we've been and what we're doing in the present. We also want to talk about what is our outlook for the future. So before you hear from us on that, we asked you all that question and asked people to send in videos about their thoughts on the future, thoughts on entrepreneurship, thoughts on their individual companies in the future. So let's watch the video and then we'll tell you a little bit about our thoughts on the future. Let's roll the tape.
My prediction for 2024 is that consumers, especially Gen Z, will consume less of everything. Less apparel, less social media, and less alcohol. So mocktails are going to be huge this year.
One of the biggest shifts in generative AI is not only all the advancements with language models, but we're seeing tremendous advancements in the field of image generation in terms of diffusion models and GANs. And for us at Queenly, we're building our own models to really amplify our augmented reality features with all the generative image AI advancements. And I think we're going to see a lot of companies really be able to expand beyond just chatbots, just language models, and do something really interesting and really creative.
Brands need to bring joy to your consumers' faces. That's gonna be really important. And that means giving experiences that really matter in store. Also, it means you have to bring humanity to your brand. What are you doing for humanity to make it better? And I also believe that price gouging is gone. You're not going to be able to fleece your customers to make your numbers anymore. You're going to have to grow. And those are my 2024 predictions.
My prediction for the next decade is that over time, people will have intelligent agents in their pockets that will not only help them with perhaps the best job opportunity for them, but will also automatically suggest places where they can avail of credit, suggest businesses that they can start based on their skill sets, maybe even suggest courses or skills that they can take on or look to learn to grow in their lives and their careers. I call these livelihood agents, and we hope at Vahan that we'll be around to build one of those over time.
I'm actually pretty optimistic because I think we've been down for a long time. I think that the people that survived this downturn are stronger for it. Therefore, those companies have indeed, talk about the pendulum swinging, they have realized that the growth at all costs model is not what people want to hear. It's either you can be unprofitable in the short term, but you got to have a path to profitability or be profitable now.
Hi, I'm Anna and I am the CEO and co-founder of Clove. So a trend I'm really excited about is personalized nutrition. So it feels like it wasn't that long ago that dairy companies were telling us that milk was the best source of calcium for us. But soon, nutrition and what it means to eat well is going to change completely. We have information about our bodies, our gut, how our heritage affects what we eat, and I'm so excited for this to become more accessible so that it can be combined with amazing inspiration and ideas for how to eat well at a very personal level.
One advice that we usually give other entrepreneurs or startup founders that are just starting out is to just always be determined and passionate about the goal that you want out of your startup. I think that most often we see that, people think you have to be the smartest or the one with the most funding or the most well-connected. Of course, it makes it a bit easier for those founders, but at the end of the day, when we experience unexpected obstacles such as, a 3-year-long global pandemic, a market downturn, it's really the survival of the fittest, right? It's always the startups and the founders that make it through no matter what.
Hi, I'm Lisa Abramson, executive coach and author of Permission to Fail, the Overachiever's Guide to Becoming Unstoppable. And I wanted to share a quick tip for those entrepreneurs out there, which is to celebrate your wins. This is simple, yet it's often overlooked, and it can work wonders to boost morale within your team, within your company. So remember to take that time, have a little fun, experience some joy, and celebrate your wins along the journey.
Our most revolutionary product to date has been our augmented reality feature that we started working on, and this year we've made tremendous improvements on fine-tuning image rendering, fit, and user experience for.
At Swiftly, we're reinventing the technology that powers mass transportation. And as an exciting update, at the end of last year, we passed 150 cities where we've now deployed our platform, touching over 2 billion annual transit trips a year. We also became profitable. I just want to thank the entire SHAKTI community for all of your support. We couldn't have done it without you. Thank you.
I'm excited to be part of the SHAKTI community because even before Keval and Liz invested, it felt like we had their team in our corner. They were asking the right questions, helping us pressure test our assumptions, and chatted with a number of different folks that we were looking to get into our initial round. And also, let's be honest, I'm mostly in it for the marshmallows.
The community has also given us a lot of mentors throughout this whole process. One mentor specifically that we love to always point out is Julie Wainwright, who is the former CEO and founder of The Real Real, and we met her through SHAKTI.
Hey Keval, hey Liz, we are at a Belly recommendation. Thank you. We met the Belly founders at your summer soiree in 2023, and we're in Paris launching Spark France, and we're at this amazing restaurant thanks to you. You're awesome.
Thank you, Shakti. We love you.
My friend Keval called me recently and said, "Hey, Jonathan, why don't you join the SHAKTI community?" And I thought, what do I need with the SHAKTI community? I mean, I'm an important guy. Look, I've written books. I've worked at important places. What do I need with you guys? And Keval points out, none of those badges actually work anymore. You're not an important guy. In fact, I looked at my wallet. The only place that still calls me an executive is the gym, and I pay them for that. So Keval said, "You can come be a Titan." I said, "Yes." What's a Titan?
First of all, thank you to everybody who gave your input. Trisha and Kathy, you get bonus points for sending 10 clips. But they're all great, and we love these insights. And if you haven't sent a clip, or if you have an insight today to share, you're welcome to do that. We'll have plenty of time. So that passionate, intense individual at the end is Jonathan Rosenberg, who many of you know, who made the mistake of hiring me at Google a long time ago. And Jonathan and Eric Schmidt wrote the book about Coach Bill Campbell, the $1 Trillion Coach, which I think many of you have read, and we distributed at the last annual meeting. as we were thinking about Shakti 3-4 years ago at this point, Eric and Jonathan were really instrumental in helping me shape some of the early thoughts. And the question that we really asked was, again, what can we do that's different, that is substantive, and that serves our two customers, the entrepreneurs and the LPs? And the theme that kept emerging was that, okay, we have to find great markets. We have to find great entrepreneurs. That's our job. That's the GP's job. That's the job we do before we write the check. But once we write the check, then what? How can we help the entrepreneurs after the fact? And Coach Campbell, who passed away a few years ago, but many of us were lucky to see him at Google in action, you could see that there was this friend, philosopher, and guide kind of a person who helped create trillions of dollars of value in Silicon Valley, literally. And how did he do that? Well, he did that not by being on the board of a company or by being an investor even, but just being that sounding board, somebody who had done it before. Bill Campbell was the CEO of Intuit at one point. He was actually a football coach at Columbia University. And many of you, Dave Gerard will talk about him, I'm sure, when we get to that session. We're just touched by Bill and his humanity. And he was able to create leaders from entrepreneurs, leaders who built companies that had global scale and had not just a great shareholder impact, but also a great stakeholder impact. So we wanted to do that. And so the question was, how do we bottle up that Bill Campbell trillion-dollar coaching philosophy and framework in a venture platform? And our answer to that was what we call the Titan platform, which is all of you guys. We went out to many of you who are very accomplished industry executives, and the word we came up with was Titans. If you have a better word, we'll use that too. But it's to say, look, these are people who have built things at scale, they walk the walk, and now are at a point in their life where they want to give back. And they give back in a variety of ways, but one of the most meaningful ways that they want to give back, which is what you've told us, is they want to help the next generation of founders. And Liz and I believe very, very strongly that the best advice for our founders doesn't come from the VC, the clueless VC, speaking for myself. It comes from these other folks who have done it before. So that's what the Titan platform is really about. It's connecting CEOs with other CEOs. And how is that coming to fruition? Today, we have more than 40 individuals who are CEOs, founders, C-level executives of all these great companies. And they were there at the beginning. These people were on day zero. And they're here as part of our fund. They're LPs in the fund, but also help mentor. They provide superpowers in every aspect of company building, right? Whether it's one-on-one CEO to CEO mentorship, whether it's hiring the executive team, whether it's tech and product strategy, go-to-market, all of these areas, we have the best of the best, world-class experts. We also share some of these wisdoms with the population at large. So we have a video channel on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, please come check it out. These are some examples of topics we have covered. And again, this is sort of like a master class on that topic from the world's best expert. And if you want to do some of these talks, we would love for you to do that with us as well. I'm going to just quickly mention some examples. We have a lot of them, just in the sake of time, 2 or 3 examples. Gautam's here, who runs Gatik, and he'll talk about that in the next session. But Gautam came to us a few months ago, last year, and he said, we need a CFO to go scale this company and take it public someday. It's like, who should we talk to? And it's like, well, Christina is probably the best person to talk to as the former vice chair of JP Morgan, who's taken over 100 companies public. And she's worked with a lot of public company CFOs. So Christina, we asked her, and she obviously dove in and helped him. Ray's here, who's done a lot of great things as the former president of Oracle and board member, chair at HP, and managing partner at Kleiner, and has seen more cycles in tech than probably most people. And he volunteered to help Gautam. So there are some amazing connections being made. Another example, Julie is working with Trisha and Kathy. They already talked about that. And again, if you're building a startup in the e-commerce resale marketplace, what better mentor than Julie Wainwright, who's done it before, very successfully from zero to IPO. And then Sarah and Colin, we touched on them briefly. They came to us maybe a couple of years ago and said, hey, we're thinking about going up market. We've been selling to SMBs. How do we go sell to the enterprise? And Dan Streetman, who's now the CEO of Tanium, before the CEO of TIPCO and SVP at Salesforce, he's like, yeah, I would be happy to talk to them. And again, who better than Dan to share his knowledge about how to go sell up market? some of the other things we have done, David Rudnitsky, who founded the top digital marketing agency in Silicon Valley, has done sessions with our founders on go-to-market. Mercedes Chatfield Taylor, who's here, who's built executive teams at venture firms and public and private companies, has done sessions on how to build your executive team and your board. Stacy Burns, whom you heard on that video, who runs a strategy communications firm in New York and is really in touch with the Gen Z audience, has helped many of our companies in terms of their outreach to Gen Z. Lisa Abramson, you heard her on the video, executive coach, has offered CEO coaching and mental wellness sessions to our founders. And then last but not the least, two people who has helped Liz and I think about, we need coaches too. And our mentors, our titans, are folks who come from the investment world. And Jamie is an exceptional individual for a reason that I love a lot. She's been at JP Morgan now over 30 years. And if you think about JP Morgan, there are some of JP Morgan folks here in the room, so they can maybe validate. It's like a continent. It's a massive company. It's all over the world, $1 trillion plus in assets. And Jamie found a way to write small checks into small funds, which seems kind of like an easy thing to do, but it's actually very, very hard for JP Morgan to do. The last time I talked to JP Morgan at my prior firm, they were like, less than 50 million cable, don't come talk to us. And they don't want to be more than 10% of the fund, so by definition, you're in a $500 million fund, which is not what we want to do. Jamie found a way to write very small checks for us. That's an act of courage and entrepreneurship, trust me, within a large enterprise, and she was able to do it. And then the guy who really started it all and who always said yes to me when I was at Google and said yes to me when I first called him about Shakti, our first LP, is Eric. And Eric's been helping Bindu, who's here, and and Bindu runs Abacus, and she's going to talk about her company in a minute. But you're like, one of the questions we get from people is like, really, like, does Eric have time to talk to founders? Like, are you serious? Yeah, he actually does. Now, why does he do that? Because he's a geek at heart. He loves AI. He wrote the book, The Age of AI. He's been a geek for 50 years. He's actually younger than that, but he's for a long time. And I don't have to ask him anything. He just loves the area. He loves the technology and its impact at scale, and he is more than happy to talk to entrepreneurs and help guide them. So we've been very lucky. We want to say thank you. All of you could be doing a lot of great things in life. You already have done amazing things in life. The fact that you would even spend a minute or $1 of your time and money with us is really a privilege for us, and we really, really appreciate it. So thank you. I want to briefly talk about our view of the future. And if you think about the future from the venture perspective, it's really about one thing, it's AI. And it's it's a good news, bad news, like that word has captured all of our oxygen, right? It's the only thing that we care about. But it is really that dramatic. And so why is it that dramatic? And what does it mean for us? What is it? It's like touching an elephant. What part of the elephant are you touching, and how do you describe it? So we're going to talk about what we think of AI. What are the implications for us and the opportunity for the companies we invest in? So just very briefly, we think that AI is really about the intersection of three things. The algorithms that have been around for a long time. Some of these algorithms are now getting reimagined. We call them models. These models need big data. Tons of data is coming through our phones and wearables, and so now all of a sudden these algorithms look very smart. The reason why Google can call a cat, because we've been uploading photos of cats for 10 years now. And then you have this massive compute that allows these algorithms to look really, really smart when they act on big data. So that's really the intersection and that makes the AI magic work. Well, so what? What's changed? So when I finished high school and I started engineering college, if I wanted to talk to the computer and I want to say hello, I would do that. How many people in this room, please raise your hand, how many people know what that is? What is that? Dave, you know, you're an engineer. Okay, so anybody? Angela, thank you. So that's hex, which is a version of ASCII. So it's hexadecimal code. This is what you say hello. In 2024, we can just say hello. And the computer understands that. So what happened in the last 40 years is that humans were forced to speak computer 40 years ago. Now the computers speak human. That's a huge, huge deal. Why? Because everybody, all 7 billion people now, can speak to computers and use computers in their daily lives. It's not just these geeks like me who had to go to special schools and learn about talking to computers, right? Now, what happened to make this the computer talk human? A lot of things happened. I'll give you one example. In 1993, Intel launched a chip called Pentium. It had 3 million transistors. It cost $1 billion of R&D to make that chip. NVIDIA just launched Blackwell, which is their latest GPU, a couple of months ago. It has 200 billion transistors, so 66,000 times more transistors. And it cost $10 billion in R&D to make that chip. So that's Moore's law. You got 10x cost, but you got 66,000 the compute power. But that's what it took to get computers to speak human. Now, what does that mean for startups and the world at large? Everything is changing, right? Productivity, again, it's not just the geeks. Every human being can now have superpowers. The skills are getting transformed because all the specialized skills are going to be done by the robots and the computers and the models. More importantly, it'll be the generalized skills. We have a 15-year-old kid at home is at high school, 9th grade. We have this discussion all the time. 5 years ago, I was like, dude, you got to do STEM. I'm not saying that anymore because STEM's going to be done by the robots. I was like, liberal arts, think about liberal arts. His mom, Susan's very happy about that. But so I think what's cool is changing. Like, again, 10 years ago, you'd say, what's cool? Like entrepreneurs, engineers are cool. And that certainly is the history of Silicon Valley. Well, maybe not. Maybe we need some holistic thinkers. And I think overall, this society at large is changing from an industrial era to, I think, the Renaissance era, where the powers and the glory and the value is going to accrue to people who can think broad terms. They can put like the Lego pieces together and provide a valuable service or a product. And so that is a generational shift that is going to impact everything. And so where is the opportunity for us? There are two opportunities that we are thinking about for the next foreseeable future for us. So these are the portfolio companies that you'll see come out of our funds. We don't think algorithms and compute is the place for startups, right? Because that's the domain of big tech or academia or open source. But data is something that startups can latch onto. So for example, imagine if we had a company that received all of your mail, physical mail. You got an envelope from the credit card company. You got the government sending you a notice. You had your vendors and your customers corresponding with you. What if that company had all of your mail and was able to digitize it? And imagine that going on for years. Now, do you think that company can run a model, open source model, to derive some insights about your business and who are you talking to in your business graph and maybe automate some of those things? That data is proprietary to that company. Nobody else in the world has that data. Okay? That is a secret sauce that nobody else can compete, even if it's just a startup. Or imagine if you had a closet full of clothes, and that closet was being digitized, and all the closets in the world were in a cloud that a company had access to. Nobody else would have access to it. Now you can run an AI model about what you should be wearing tomorrow morning and why. So those are the kind of things we're talking about. By the way, these are actual examples of companies. I will not steal your thunder. You can talk about it. Okay, and then the second opportunity is, I think, in the real physical world, where AI and robotics are really two sides of the same coin. Robotics has been around for 50 years, but the robots are getting really, really smart. Why? Because the perception, when a robot moves around, all of the data, the big data, if you really think about it, it's in the physical world. Look at all this image has gazillion pixels in it. If the robot can get AI at the edge, magical things are likely to happen, and we're already seeing some of those things. So whether it's a robot that drives on its own, some of you took a Waymo today, that's the intersection of AI and robotics. So two opportunities: proprietary data, startups with proprietary data, and AI and robotics. That's where our fund and our strategy is going. I'll say this, as VCs, we are, I'll speak for myself, often wrong, never in doubt. So please, if you see something different, you guys are smarter than us, you are the eyes and ears. We look forward to learning from you. Everything I just said is a hypothesis, and I'm probably going to embarrass myself because the next panel is AI experts talking about where AI is going. So Brian, be kind.
Okay, so I'm going to invite Brian Nowak up to the stage. Brian is managing director at Morgan Stanley and their lead tech analyst covering large cap internet. So pretty much any large internet company you can think of, just to name Google, Amazon, Meta, and can offer insights on kind of the view from the top on AI and its implications for the large cap companies. And then in a few minutes, Brian will invite 3 of our CEOs from Abacus, Gatik, and Betteromics to come up and talk about what they're doing at their startups in the AI space. So Brian, over to you. Do you need this?
Do I need this for the, can everyone hear me? Do I need the mic? Do I need the mic for the, use the mic? Okay, cool. All right, well, thank you. See, AI would have called it Brian, not Brain, it's no big deal. I get it all the time. Thank you for welcoming me. If I can get the slides. That's fine. So the punchline on the slide, so I head up all of tech research at Morgan Stanley, and that basically includes any of the big cap tech names that you know, or any of the applications that you have on your phone, between Google, Meta, Amazon, 50 companies in total, but all of those big companies. And we've been spending a lot of time writing about AI, and really we've called it the data era for about 10 years, and how we think about each of these subsequent cycles around tech. And I think one of the things we're going to talk about a lot with generative AI, I actually agree with sort of what we just talked about of this is really the value where data is becoming more valuable than ever. With the key takeaway being, we're now able to analyze unstructured data in much more detailed manner. So here's what I was talking about in the cycles. So over the past 10 years, we've written a lot about sort of how we think about subsequent cycles of tech, starting with the mainframe, the mini computer, desktop computer, mobile, and now the data era, which we've been calling the data era for a while. That is the AI era. What do you see with each of these? The number of users that are readily available to be impacted by these technologies grow every single time. The point where we went from 10 million mini computers in the 80s to now everyone probably having 1, 2, or maybe even 3 computers on them right now with 2 phones and maybe a Surface or an iPad or something like that. So billions of users, more and more data. You know, the amount of data on Earth we think grows about 20% year on year every year. You know, population growth is 1 to 2, so there's a lot of data constantly being created. Compute power, people talked about it, but GPUs, which are NVIDIA's magic chips, really are unlocking a lot of new types of computation and machine learning work that we've never been able to do. So compute power on all this rising amount of data is giving us all these new capabilities and essentially expanding the impact across the entire economy and every single sector. And I think there's going to be a lot of startups and tech diffusion across the entire economy. This is a little bit of a Rorschach test, but it's pretty important, we think, from a macroeconomic perspective. What the blue line is, well, let's start with the gold bars. The gold bars are essentially periods over the course of the last 50, 60 years where you have seen significant increases in infrastructure CapEx. Companies saying we're spending more on data centers, we're spending more on our tech infrastructure, we're moving onto the World Wide Web. It happened with the mainframe era in the late 50s, the Windows PC era in the 80s, the Mosaic era in the early 90s, and now the data era. We're seeing CapEx go up a lot. The blue line. The blue line is essentially the year-on-year change in non-farm business sector output for the economy. It is a measure of productivity for the US economy. And what you can see here is there's actually a pretty unique thing that seems to happen to productivity following these step-ups in tech investment. Productivity improves. You see it after the IBM mainframe period, productivity goes up. Windows PC period coming in the early 80s, productivity goes up. The World Wide Web, when companies all went online with Mosaic, boom, productivity goes up. Look where we are in productivity right now. This is a problem we have in the economy. Productivity still is pretty low, and we argue that the generative AI advances and sort of what we think is to come from the quote-unquote data era is going to drive incremental productivity across the entire economy, which is really important when we think about interest rates, the way the Fed is going to react, when we think about the IPO cycle, all of those dynamics, productivity can have a very big impact on. Here's an unstructured data point. The cool thing about large language models and what we can do with GPUs is we can finally analyze the video of me, a picture of this great scene. Anything that you have never been able to analyze before, the Waymo routes, the fact that UPS and FedEx are now feeding in their driver routes into these models and saying, how can we drive more efficiently? And despite these companies that have said, we have the best routes. We study these routes with humans. We never turn left. The models are saying, no, actually, here are more effective ways the drivers can drive, and they're actually seeing reductions in logistics costs. All those Waymo cars riding around, they are analyzing millions and millions and millions of data points and routes and edge cases and building up the way the routes can drive. The amount of unstructured data on the earth we think it's about 80% of data is unstructured. It's not Excel sheets. It's not digital databases. It's the driver routes. It's when you walk into a Walmart or a Target, it's the fact that there are cameras watching everyone walk around. You know what they can do now? They can take all that data with cameras and they can actually build better heat maps about how people move through the stores at different points of the day, at different weather points. And the stores are figuring out how to put different items on end caps to increase the amount that they sell per hour that they're open. There is so much data that has never been able to be analyzed that now we can analyze. And you're already seeing a lot of use cases across the entire economy. I just show a series of them here across healthcare, financials, digital advertising, retail freight, customer service, et cetera. But when we talk about tech diffusion, impact on startup opportunities across every single sector, these are all examples that we already have seen, like early use cases of this. So I think it's important to sort of not limit yourself when you think about what could you do with generative AI? What can you do with these large language models? What can you build with applications built in these large language models? When I present to boards of companies and present to non-tech companies on this, I say, let's start with your data. It all starts with your data. What are analyses with your data you've always wanted to do, but never imagined you could? Because now there are a lot of ways that we're going to be able to analyze data across the entire economy that we've never been able to before, which we think is going to have a lot of impact on the way productivity rolls, the way the labor market changes. Our kids are all going to go to trade school, to his point. But there's just a lot of changes we think that are coming across a lot of different types of sectors. I have a ton of these examples just to kind of put some pictures behind it. I'm sure you've heard about a lot of the advances in healthcare and content creation that is making us all more productive. The AlphaFold dynamic is really interesting, where the other way I sort of talk about generative AI is I say, this is actually the period where we're analyzing unstructured data for the first time, and we're able to create content with the models that are going to make us more productive. The AlphaFold example, you had a series of engineers and researchers who fed a ton of data on the proteins and the genes and everything that makes up our human body. And it took a long time, and obviously the models hallucinated a lot, and they made up a lot of fake answers. But eventually, they got to a point where the model of the human body that this large language model built was more accurate than we've ever had before. And what that is enabling healthcare companies to do is they can use this more accurate model of everything that makes up our human body to accelerate drug development, figure out side effects of different types of treatments. We figured out a way to detect early onset Parkinson's faster than we've ever been able to before. So there are so many advances going on from the fact that we can now take data we've never been able to analyze as comprehensively and create new types of content, in that case in healthcare. In the bottom right, Channel 1 AI, I'm sure a lot of you have probably seen this. She's completely fake. That's all built a diffusion model. And they are basically making full digital news reports that are all done with generative AI. Obviously, this is all very early, and it is going to take a long time to get to a lot of points of real use case, but scaling these use cases. But the broad-based use case is what sort of is most impressive to me. Robots, completely agree with you there. You can actually talk to these robots now. And again, you don't have to talk to it in some weird code or click on directions or write out directions. You can tell the robot, go pick up the spilled milk. And we're just going to have a lot more applications for robots, both on the consumer side and in the industrial side as well. Some of the early cases on productivity, I think the earliest, I would say the areas of early adoption we've seen, assisted coding is probably the one that's farthest along, I would say, where we talk about, again, creating content. These large language models can write code. They can debug code. They can give suggestions on how to optimize code. And so both big cap tech companies and small tech companies are saying, you know what, if I give a smaller team of skilled engineers an AI-assisted coder, they're actually more productive and they're a lot happier because there are fewer errors and they don't have to spend as much time fixing the errors that maybe the lower tier engineers would have made previously. So we're seeing really big increases in productivity, anywhere from 20 to 50% increases in productivity of engineering fleets, depending on the size from code. Customer service on the top, there's a lot of tests going on where, right now, if my flight home tonight gets canceled, that would be a bummer. But I have to call someone, talk to a human, maybe I would get rebooked tomorrow, who knows. Eventually what's going to happen is American Airlines will have an AI agent that will first talk to me, eventually talk to my AI agent, and just automatically rebook me in the area that is most cost effective and sort of tailored to my schedule that they know. So this is their customer service area we're seeing a lot of companies test very, very early, but given the importance of brand relationship with companies, the perception of companies, customer service is going to take a little bit of time because you don't want these things to be wrong and ruin the reputation or brand of a company. But customer service is something that's going to change a lot. What we've seen so far on it, though, is there's a lot of companies, this 14% increase in productivity on the top. What that is Verizon and a lot of companies are feeding their customer service manuals into these models, and they're having the machine listen to the calls real time with a human and telling the human how to route it through. Because what it does is it figures out faster the most cost-effective and efficient way to get someone through the customer service queue and the process. And so right now we have this sort of hybrid situation where the customer service bot that has read the manual, knows how to optimize for profitability and reputation, is telling the person what to say and the person's just repeating it. That is very early, but you can imagine, how quickly those customer service jobs are probably going to be significantly reduced. More examples, but I think the punchline is it's across the entire economy. I'm happy to talk through examples in any industry where we're seeing a lot of pickup in efficiency. This is a framework we're going to use across a lot of industries of new business opportunities, areas of efficiency, external productivity, and content creation, the next framework that we developed. The content creation piece is something that has sort of come faster. We didn't put that slide in. The content creation piece is something that's come faster, and these are the diffusion models. I highly recommend, I'm sure many of you, especially if you're out here, have seen OpenAI's Sora, which is their text to video creation model. Meta has a similar one called Emu. Google's Gemini will do the same. But these text to video models and text to image models have progressed much faster than certainly I thought. And it is not going to be far away until you're going to have, instead of a 60-second video, you're going to get a 2-minute video, and you're going to get a 3-minute video, and the quality will improve. And eventually, if you take 5 3-minute videos and put them together, all of a sudden you actually have a show. And this is no longer something where it's going to be 5 years, 10 years away. The pace of innovation on these diffusion models and content creation is really moving quickly. Advertisers are already testing text-to-image models on Facebook. Some of the ads you get on Facebook now are actually not made by people, they're made by machines. So just know this content creation, these diffusion models are really advancing quickly. The last thing, so from a public equity perspective, how do you make money if you're investing in these stocks or if you're a entrepreneur sort of thinking through the sectors? What we've seen in past tech cycles is in the early part of the cycle, so the mobile cycle is on the top. You make the most money early on the semiconductor and the real underlying technology that powers all the technology. Last cycle was Qualcomm and ARM. This time around, look at the bottom. The reason why NVIDIA and AMD are up most days, and ASML most days, they make the key technology. Then you go back to the top. The second part of the phase we make most money on is in the actual infrastructure. Samsung, Apple mattered last time during the mobile era, but the infrastructure. That this time is Google, Amazon, Microsoft. And then in the end, the big blue at the top, where you make the most, on the software layer at the very top. And I think it's going to be very similar this tech cycle, with the only difference being the non-tech adopters. We think that the diffusion capability here, outside of tech, healthcare companies, travel companies, retail companies, freight companies, we think there's going to be a lot of non-tech winning companies that will actually really benefit from a lot of these changes from Gen AI. My last slide before we bring up the panelists and the experts is kind of goes back to the always confident, but always wrong. This is a summary of how Wall Street analysts like myself have done in early cycles like this in predicting what actually happens. And there are two main errors that this tech cycle, I'm trying to prevent myself from making the most consistent mistake that tech analysts make. The first thing, it's not on here, but they overestimate how quickly things happen. There are no 2-year cycles. This is a 10-year cycle. And so we're not eliminating all the customer service jobs this year. We're not going to have an Academy Award-winning Gen AI movie next year. So I spend a lot of time with investors talking about, it does take time. There are a lot of real gating factors to the pace at which these products become broadly scaled. However, once they do scale, the mathematical error that most people in my seat have made over the last 20 plus years is we underestimate the impact. PCs, originally Morgan Stanley said there's going to be about 225 million PC users. Wrong by 35%. Internet got the users wrong by 60%. Mobile got the users wrong by 35%, and then cloud over 20%, too low. So the punchline is, everything that I just told you could very well be wrong, too low by 40%. So do not underestimate the impact of what's going to happen with Gen AI over the course of the next 10 to 20 years, because that could very well just be too conservative in all of this. With that, you want to bring up the panelists? Cool. So I think you guys are, thank you for coming. We have 3 very exciting CEOs and entrepreneurs that are doing a lot with AI. So I wanted to sort of first ask each of you about your companies, what your main mission is, and sort of how you've been using generative AI so far. So maybe, Bindu, do you want to sort of talk first about Abacus?
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you, Keval, for inviting me. Keval's been my mentor from, I don't know, for the last 20 years, maybe, but one of our, thank you so much. So just to give you guys an idea about Abacus, Abacus AI started in 2019. So we're kind of, I would say, a fairly mid to old startup. And when we started, we had a very simple vision. We said AI, not humans, will build applied AI systems. And when everybody, we pitched this to VCs, everybody was like, sounds strange, probably won't happen. Do you really understand how AI models work, right? And we were like, no, this is going to happen sooner or later. Remember, there were no LLMs then, there was nothing. And so people were very, very skeptical. Over the last 5 years, we've built that vision out. And of course, thank you, OpenAI, as well. And now we have, I think, what I call a state-of-the-art platform where AI builds AI at scale. And so think kind of like these software assistants that that Brian just spoke about, but kind of think about the same kind of assistants now building on top of a constrained AI platform and building out machine learning models for your enterprise. Things like churn, personalization, forecasting, but also other LLM apps and AI agents. So it's a little meta, but that's what Abacus is.
All right, great. Gautam?
Very cool. Hi, everyone. Gautam Narang, the founder and CEO of Gatik. So at Gatik, we do autonomous transportation for the middle mile segment of the supply chain. Started the company in 2017, and we had 2 criteria in mind before starting the company. The first one was solving a real customer pain point. Now, I know it sounds obvious, and it should be, but back in 2016 and 17, the AV industry was at its peak hype. No one was thinking about commercializing this technology, and everyone thought that, okay, in 3-4 years' time, we'll solve this technology and then figure out the use case or the business model. For me and my founding team, we wanted to really start with the customer pain point. And then the second criteria that we had in mind was focusing on an application that was more near term compared to, let's say, robotaxi application and some of the other applications that most of the companies around that time were focusing on. So based on these two criteria, we decided to focus on this mid-mile segment, which is B2B short-haul logistics. And the use case here is we use our light and medium-duty trucks to move goods between distribution centers, fulfillment centers, and retail locations. So the whole idea here is, can we constrain the autonomy problem by operating these trucks back and forth on fixed and repeatable routes and get to the point of driver out faster and safer than some of the other applications where you have to solve autonomy more broadly. And based on this thesis, we were able to hit a worldwide first milestone where in 2021, Gatik became the first and the only autonomous trucking company to pull the driver out in a commercial capacity. And since then, we have done thousands of driver out deliveries with customers and partners like Walmart, Loblaws, across multiple markets on public road. All this with a 100% safety record. And AI is at the heart of all the decision-making that's happening on these vehicles. So excited to be here, and thank you so much for Keval, Shakti, for having me here.
It's great. That's super exciting. We're going to come back and add more questions for each of you. But Angela?
Sure. It is nice to be here again, to see all of you. Last year, I was here to talk about AI, so some of you already know, but Romex is an AI infrastructure company specialized in healthcare and life sciences. And in particular in unstructured data, in omics data, as well as healthcare data, which is the motherlode of most of the data in healthcare. We got inspiration to build this company from my time at Grail and at Google. Grail is the first commercialized liquid biopsy company for screening cancer. And molecular biology is definitely coming of age. There's a lot of specialized requirements in healthcare and life science. To start with is regulatory regime. The data is not shared like most of consumer data. And so there's a lot of regulatory governance requirements. The second is just the domain is very different. Most of you probably go buy toothbrushes all the time, and it is a repeatable event. For a lot of healthcare and life science, in order to do R&D, these events hasn't actually happened. And so the reasoning of these events, it's very difficult to come by. New drugs are developed in chemistry that hasn't yet happened. And so AI is very good at doing pattern recognition, but it's not good at reasoning. And so in this specialized vertical, it's important to couple not just AI infrastructure, but how to go about reasoning and inference that is based on actual chemistry, biology, which are knowledge that sits in unstructured data and also without evidence. And so the infrastructure has to figure out how to do these inference in a rigor that, that works with the compliance and regulatory regime. And so we believe it's a big opportunity. And while a lot of biotech pharma is now waking up to they have to use AI, I remember when I entered this field in 2016, biopharma is like, AI will never work in medicine. Clearly, biopharma is not saying that. They're scrambling to figure out how do they actually adopt it in a way that befits what the industry requirements are. So we're happy to go on this journey with biopharma companies.
Great. So I think, all three of you are very good examples of sort of industry and domain specific applications that are using this technology, which we think are going to be really important drivers of change to the economy. And the healthcare example is perfect, as is transportation. But you've had these startups for a while. So let me ask you this. What has changed the most now versus, call it, before all the OpenAI craziness that started in 4Q 2022, what has changed the most in sort of your discussion with partners, ability to sort of grow the business? You mentioned a couple, but just curious what's changed most for you all?
Well, I can go first, but we're succeeding. No, which is actually a really good thing in a good way, right? The acceleration, I would say, is about 5x in the last year in terms of how many more people are engaging with us. And in terms of like just generally, I mean, I think maybe the analysts know this better than I do. AI is not like a big money-making business, or wasn't so far. Data was, like databases and stuff like that. So in my previous life, I used to work at Amazon Web Services. And I used to be in the AI space, and people were like, oh, you are the losing business. I mean, it's cool, it's sexy, but doesn't make money. And now finally, it's actually making money. And the reason for that is people are actually beginning to see the kind of like the magic that AI can do, right? It's no longer kind of prototyping, it's actually production, I would say. And also other, just not just LLMs, not just diffusion models. We're seeing people kind of now starting to say, oh, I can take forecasting seriously. I can take unstructured data seriously too, but it's like data. It's no longer like structured, unstructured. Let's go figure out, to Brian's point, let's go figure out what we can do with this data, and let's do it quickly.
I think for us, we have now a lot more proof points, meaning around technology has been validated across multiple customers, multiple markets, clear commercial traction. So our customers are lining up to adopt this solution and this technology. Regulations have been more favorable over the last few years. We have spent a lot of time with the policymakers and the regulators to help them educate and inform them about how we are approaching this problem, right? When we talk about AI-first systems, safety is at the heart of what we have to get everyone comfortable with, right? Today, when we talk about Gen AI, majority of the applications are for non-safety critical applications, right? When we're talking about pulling the driver out, having these vehicles on the road where the AI is making the decision making, there are real concerns from the regulators and policymakers. So for us, we have been able to address those concerns by adding safety redundancies from a classical robotic standpoint. So in many ways, our approach is hybrid in nature, where the AI system is taking the decisions, but we have a layer that is more deterministic from classical robotics technique that allows us to have surety around the decisions that are being made from our AI system. So more proof points now than the early days. In the early days, we received a lot of pushback that by the time Gatik goes to market, this problem would be solved more broadly, right? Everyone was promising 3 to 4 year timeline where we'll have tens of thousands of robotaxis or millions of robotaxis. Now, I know the progress that Waymo and some of the other players have made over the last year or so is very encouraging, very exciting. And scale is the thing that everyone is focused on. And how quickly can we unlock scale to your estimation around how long would it take? I think that's the real question that everyone is focused on now.
Yeah, I think the autonomous journey. Over the last 10 years, myself and my colleague at Morgan Stanley, I think we have cut our autonomous adoption curve 4 times in the last 10 years, just made it flatter and flatter, because it is such a complicated engineering problem. So, let me ask you this, Angela, before you answer sort of what's changed. On autonomous specifically, what areas do you think sort of generative AI and these new models that are coming, these new capabilities are really unlocking and could drive even faster adoption?
Yeah, I would say great question. So high level, there are 2 classifications. One can be onboard systems where are we using foundational models or Gen AI for onboard decision making, and the other classification is offboard. So we use foundational models heavily for offboard, training of the models, data augmentation, verification, and validation. So today, all the progress that we have seen on the AI front is great for us offboard. On board, there are still concerns around having large foundational models doing end-to-end decision making. So it's great for applications like ADAS, where there is a person on board ready to take over if needed, right? If I talk about the Tesla Autopilot or the FSD system, they're training this giant DNN. The inputs are sensor feed, typically images, and the output is control commands, right? Steering angle, acceleration, and braking. So this end-to-end system is great for non-safety critical applications where there is a person ready to take over control if needed. And said otherwise, hallucinations can be catastrophic for our application. So great use for off-board application, but for on-board, AI-first systems are great, but you have to find ways to validate the output. And the way we do it is based on route-specific information and know-how that we have gathered over years of operation.
Angela, what's changed most?
Thanks. I think that after from last year, what I see in biopharma are two things. One is biopharma is just like any other enterprise. And so superficial adoption of OpenAI and LLM, like, writing your long, protocols, generating summary, those are very quickly adopted. I don't know that besides a little bit of productivity gain on the office side, that would have lasting effect on biopharma. The core of what biopharma needs to do, which is to discover and to do R&D in a more efficient manner. Only 5% of drugs ever finish going through a clinical trial and get adopted. And so there's a tremendous amount of waste, and there are a lot of things that can de-risk that process. It's also a very delayed response. Drugs takes anywhere from 10, 20 years to get developed. And that process, I am seeing some change. I don't know how much of it is really related to LLM and the generative AI phase. Like I was saying, a few years ago, we saw a lot of tech companies that would start to have these sort of hyperbole papers that come out. Well, we're able to find tumors faster than the human. We're able to read radiology scans better than humans. I think that narrative has been, coming to something that is a little bit more real, which is how can it actually assist, the human in the loop to actually create a level of quality to the radiology reads. On the molecular biology side, we're seeing, AlphaFold can generate a lot of protein. We're starting to see better experiments in figuring out whether any of these synthetic protein actually work, which is a very big leap. Just because you know what it looks like physically doesn't mean that it will become a therapeutic. At the end of the day, human biology is just super complicated, and that experiment hasn't been done, that chemistry hasn't ever happened in a human being, and you still have to go through that experiment. But what I'm starting to see biopharma does is to take AI seriously to the extent that they adopt their methodology in assessing how AI can help. I'm hearing more papers and business propositions where they say, let's actually compare. Science companies are all about doing experiments. They're actually comparing if they use AI, and recently there's also been a hype on using knowledge graph. So if we actually use these reasoning and AI engine together versus the traditional, structured data, SQL databases, and traditional analysis to look at two pathways of doing analysis of applying to actual drug development, we're actually seeing an efficiency gain in either shortening of timeline or de-risking of these applications. Now, there's a very delayed response in knowing whether these things work or not, but I feel like the seriousness in biopharma actually participating in evaluating whether AI will work for them is actually happening. And biopharma is going to, be the last industry to pick up anything. So like Brian was saying, I think it would take a long time. This is going to be the last industry to have it be mature. But of course, I'm an opportunistic, and optimistic entrepreneur. I think that in this space, last year I talked about in the AI's field, the most important thing is quality. I think companies in this space will only win if you have the best quality product, in that you're really careful, especially in this regulated industry, to be able to show that your platform is not getting 80%, 85%, 90%, or 95% of the answers, but we have a rigor to get to 100% of the answer. And I think that leap will take a long time, and that's what is going to make this industry take a long time to actually mature to the point where everybody can actually use it.
Yeah, regulated industries are hard. In financials, I'm hoping I can get Copilot by the end of the year. Just because there's the regulatory hurdles around us, us and biopharma and healthcare is very similar. So let's talk about other points of friction, because I think we sort of all agree it's going to be more of a longer cycle, not a quick twitch cycle. But I would be curious to hear from you all sort of other points of friction or misunderstanding among press, the media, the me's, as to real challenges to scaling these large language model-based applications or next-gen generative AI applications? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, for us, it's architecture. Data needs to be federated. All of you that are actually technical, like federated query and federated training is not really a thing. We're starting to see, biopharma companies actually try to do it and have evaluated and realized, there is a whole project that evaluated if you have federated queries and federated training on small molecules, do you actually get an actual gain in seeing how small molecules perform? And the answer is very marginal. And so for biopharma, in the world of hoarding data, they don't want to share. And bigger databases that is not yet have the future of chemistry in it is not indicative of being able to predict the future. But on the other hand, it is still helpful to be able to build cohorts of data that came from different places to create new cohorts to study. And so federated data is important, but it's so difficult to execute. Pharma wants on-prem solution. All of you in the audience is like, who wants on-prem solutions anymore? But that's the world that pharma is in, and I don't see that going away for many, many reasons. And so the infrastructure that is required in pharma is such a friction point. Data governance is another friction point, where a lot of PIs, in biopharma, everybody has a PhD. And individual incentives are aligned to publish paper, not to get a drug to market. It's a very sad state of the world, but that's what it is. And how do you overcome that? It has to come from the business use of this technology. The head of the business, the head of these mid-pharma and big pharma has to actually have a business initiative to force it top down. We're starting to see some of it. I think the mid-sized pharma is going to have an easier time doing this than the big pharma, even though big pharma has more of the data. And this space moves slowly, but I think we're going to see the proof points of some of this. It's just going to take a while to get over that data governance issue and these federated data issues.
So is your view then in healthcare that mid-sized pharma moves faster and because of just, compliance issues and just more willingness, and that actually ends up shoehorning big pharma into moving faster to sort of catch up with the smaller companies?
Yeah, so my view, and just like all of you that are predicting the future, I could well be wrong, but I think that big pharma will end up buying this as opposed to building it. Big pharmas are like Cisco and the EMCs of the world, as a conglomerate. And they will end up acquiring solutions based on a smaller proof point, almost like a proof of concept in a smaller company that they would acquire. And that has proven that it works because you have to have some nimbleness, and it's already so not nimble in biopharma that a smaller pharma company would have to adopt it, see it, bring it to market, and have the big pharma see that as that. Anything that can take productivity, this is like interest rate. Anything that can take productivity in R&D from 3% to 4%, it's a giant leap. It's a 33% gain. But I think that it needs to be proven in a smaller setting, and I think those smaller settings are going to happen. We're going to see it in the next couple of years, but for the entire industry, it's still going to take a while.
So just building on that and along the same theme for us and our industry, it's mostly around validation, meaning proving that your system is safe enough when you expand to a new market or a new route. And there's a huge debate within our industry, what is good enough? Meaning, when are you ready to pull the driver out, right? I'll take two examples. One is Waymo, the other one is Cruise, right? Cruise tried expanding too quickly. They were launching new markets very, very quickly, and they stumbled, right? And then there's a debate going on, what is good enough? So for a very long time in the AV industry, all the AV developers felt and said, okay, any performance of these technologies better than a human driver, that's the bar, that's good enough. Lately, everyone has learned and realized that's not the case. The expectation from this kind of technology is almost 100%, meaning your performance of these systems have to be close to 100. It cannot be better than humans. And everyone is trying to figure out, is there an industry-wide bar or metric that we can target that will allow us to basically start validating and start pulling the driver out? And unfortunately, it's And it's unlikely that there's ever going to be that industry-wide KPI that we as the AV developers can target, because every application is different, every market or what we call operational domains is very different. So the bar is different for different companies and different applications. So who gets to decide what is good enough? So that's basically the debate that's happening in the AV industry, and we at Gatik, we believe that it's important to have all the different stakeholders at the table, and there needs to be an independent firm involved to facilitate discussions and establishing that acceptable risk bar. There's not going to be a zero risk situation, right? There will be incidents, there will be accidents, as long as all the different stakeholders, which is we as the AV developer, our customers, local regulators, policymakers, emergency services, all of them have a say in defining that bar. We believe that's the right framework to go about launching these kind of technologies. So validation is something that needs to be addressed before we can unlock scale in the AV space.
I think regulation is another key aspect of your industry. There's a lot of initiatives, it seems, with regulators to try to figure out AI. I think one of the things I've sort of learned is a lot of politicians probably still don't understand the last wave of tech. How does Google make money? How does Meta make money? The infamous we sell ads quote from Zuckerberg. So what have you noticed from a regulatory perspective that's changed over the last year plus as AI has become such a bigger part of the zeitgeist?
Sure. They are interested to learn more, right? There's an openness around trying to figure out what does this technology mean for, from regulation standpoint. So there is an openness from the regulators to learn more. And then also what we have learned is it's very important to be proactive, like ask for permission before doing anything. We call this the anti-Uber approach, right? Like for this kind of technology, it's important to get buy-in from everyone before you take a step. Otherwise, companies as big as Cruise can stumble and fall, right?
Yeah, so going back to the constraints question, I think humans in large organizations are the biggest constraint, right? And actually, this is going to change really quickly. So the way I think about this is, I live in two different worlds on a regular basis. One, I live on Twitter, where everything moves at rocket speed. Supposedly, software engineers are replaced, right? And then I live in these, and then I talk to my enterprise customers. There's one really large fast food company that we're working with. We work with really large ones. They took 3 months to sign a stupid, silly agreement, right? And I'm like, okay, I don't know when you're going to be defunct. But here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen, I think. In the next couple of years, you're going to see startups actually start replacing real roles with humans. Right, with AI, right? And that's going to happen. And to the point of technology moves slowly and then moves very rapidly, is going to kick in. And we're going to see that a lot of human functions, procurement, security, infosec, stopping people, politics, emotions, all need to go away from enterprises for enterprises to succeed, right? Getting positive emotion is fine, but kind of killing others isn't. And if you ask me why my company is not a huge, big success, that's literally the only reason. We sell to large enterprises, they move really slowly, it takes years. And that has to accelerate, right? And that's true, I think, everything here is a little bit like that. To the point of regulation, I actually have this view that regulation's not bad if you can actually kind of serve all of, if they have a bunch of rules, just make sure you get everything done, like in security. It's not the security rules itself, it's the humans who kind of slow everything down, even if you comply by all the rules. We turn around our security questionnaires in one day. They take 3 months to review it, to look at it. It takes 1 millisecond maybe for the AI to review it. This just gives you how bad humans are. So, if we want to save our species, we better start competing.
Yeah, we do CIO surveys every quarter about what we've done for years, but even on Gen AI, most companies, they sort of expect a low single-digit percentage of spend to be toward generative AI. This is more of a year of data readiness. A lot of companies don't have data lakes. They don't know what their unstructured data are. So it's more like 25 could be the year of further adoption, but this is sort of a year of data readiness. Yeah. And even some of the other things that come up are cultural changes. To your point of, they're worried about how do we ensure we are reskilling our workers. So questions for the group? Yep.
With respect to the regulatory issues around autonomous vehicles, sorry. This is live or not? This live?
Yep.
The role of insurance companies. The role of, who is liable if an AV has an accident? Manufacturer, software programmers, owner, that kind of issue, I think, embeds the technology in the social, economic context.
That's very true. Maybe I'll give you a non-answer answer here. So if you want to really test the levels of autonomy, meaning level 2, level 3, level 4, look at who's liable in case of an accident, right? So in level 4, we as the AV developer and the service provider, we assume liability for everything. And obviously, in Tesla's case, which is a level 2 system, great ADAS system, not level 4. And I'm not a believer that Tesla will get to robotaxis this year or anytime soon. So in that case, in the level 2 space, it's the driver who's liable. Now, there is this gray area, which is level 3, where the system is on and engaged for certain geographical locations, and they're responsible. But then Mercedes came out with this level 3 system. But if you read the fine print, they still hold the driver accountable for, basically the driver is liable for everything. So it's a marketing spin to level 3. It's not really level 3, it's level 2, because the driver is responsible. So who at the end of the day is liable for accidents or incidents will help you differentiate which company is at level 4 or level 2 or even level 3. So, but for us, we as the AV developer and the service provider, we assume liability for our operations, our technology. And today we have a lot more data and proof points to say our technology is better than a human driver. So on the routes and the networks that we operate on, our premiums are lower than legacy solutions. So, and we can now back that up with a lot of data across those routes.
Quick follow-up on that. As a level 4 aspirational company, are you able to even get insurance coverage for that? Or is it something that's, again, to Bindu's argument that large companies move very, very slowly? Or
yeah.
Is that something that's happening? Or is
that's a great question. So our business is a partnership-heavy business, not just us, meaning no one company can unlock level 4 at scale. So it's you have to work with different partners. One of the frameworks that we have adopted is align incentives with these partners. So we took money from our insurance provider, and they are on the cap table, so they are more incentivized to work closely with us, support us in the early days. Now we have a lot more insurance providers that are excited to underwrite our fleets, in North America, because of the 100% safety record, and also the fact that we have a lot more data to prove that we are actually safer. And then with the whole AI argument, we need to have frameworks and guardrails around AI systems, meaning that we have to find ways to validate or look inside these black boxes and confirm the output that is being calculated from these DNNs. So, and we have that kind of hybrid system on our stack. And that basically gives the insurance company a lot of comfort that the system is well thought of, and there are guardrails for AI if needed.
Thank you.
So this question is for you, Bindu, because Angela, you're working on something where if the wrong molecule goes into somebody's body, they die.
Yeah.
You're working on something, you take a driver out to soon, people die. But there are a lot of use cases in the last 10 years I worked with hospitals where, for example, in the retail example of stocking the shelves with things that may or may not be the most profitable, but you can do a bunch of experiments to succeed. Are you seeing things in the work you're doing where there is low-hanging fruit, where it's not like a Bruce Willis movie, you got the wrong wire, someone dies?
Yeah. Now, all of machine learning, very frankly, is mostly that today, right? It's kind of like, Angela called it superficial, but I'll take it. But like writing, it's very simple, easy. And also the human in the loop, like a lot of things have human in the loop. I mean, you don't want to use ML to deploy that for like mission critical conditions. And this is kind of like why the AI model isn't there on the car or whatever. And there's so many other things where either you have the human in the loop or you can take, 85, 90, 92% accuracy. I would say almost nothing today is 100%. And that's why you're seeing like kind of the low-hanging fruit being things like forecasting and or like writing. Coding is a great one because it's an assistant. So this is all why, like, if you really think about it, we haven't replaced a single profession fully yet. Not that, we should or anything, but it's kind of like, but have we increased productivity? Sure. So yeah, I mean, totally that's the way to go, at least in the next couple of years, I think.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the questions and everything else.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Welcome, everyone. So we're going to get started again. In the last panel, we saw and heard from our early stage entrepreneurs. And by the way, one thing on Brian Novak, who just, I think, left. Brian's a big deal because, and especially if you're an entrepreneur, because, it's like imagine the night before the IPO and you get interviewed by the analyst. So for Angela, Gautam, and Bindu, that just happened, okay? So you got your dress rehearsal for the IPO 6-8 years in advance. Brian told me that if it's on the internet, he covers it. And so he's a really humble guy, but I think we heard from one of the best analysts on the planet that covers AI. So that's one end of the spectrum. And then the other end of the spectrum is the exit, right? So the IPO climate. And for that, we have the world's best experts. Michael Harris, who is the global head of capital markets at New York Stock Exchange. Christina Morgan, who we all know, just retired as vice chair of JP Morgan, was also the co-founder of H&Q back in the day, the Four Horsemen. I know of you as a co-founder. You were there. Ray Lane, who we talked about earlier, who's seen, again, many more cycles. And then Dr. Bill Janeway, who's the former vice chair of Warburg Pincus, and has written several books about the innovation economy. So we're thrilled to have you here and really grateful for your time. Liz is going to join me in this conversation. And again, the topic is what's happening with the IPO. And so I'm going to start with Michael. What do you want us in this room as entrepreneurs and investors in the private markets to know about the public markets and the IPO climate today?
I think it's important to think about the IPO market in a few different elements. So there's kind of the before times and the current times and kind of how we think about the market going forward. So, the conversation that we had earlier about just the market dynamic, call it in the pre-21 era, very, very different. Plenty of tolerance for risk, much lower interest rate environment, and as a result, to your earlier comment, you saw 1,000 IPOs in 2021. A lot of them focused in kind of the riskiest part of the marketplace. That has changed dramatically. We are now in an environment where there's much more of a focus on what I think of as more of a back to basics element of the marketplace. So it's much more of a focus on scale, growth, and also a pathway to profitability. And to a certain extent, kind of the softer element of, is there an ability for the leadership team to execute over the long term? And then going forward, to your earlier point, be always skeptical of anyone who gives any type of guidance. I think you're going to see a broadening out of that over time, but a lot of it's going to be focused on what happens in the broader macro environment. Now they took away the view.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but we'll bring it back.
It's not a good sign when I start talking. And I think the other element is just what happens in terms of the investor return profile. So one thing we are seeing, which is very fortunate, is that a lot of the more recent IPOs that have gone to market, they've been fairly positive. A good example is Ibotta, which priced last night. That opened just about an hour ago, up about 35% roughly. It's still trading fairly well. So hopefully that's a good sign of things to come.
So good day in the market, good day in San Francisco. Michael, if you can just extend a little bit on that and talk about the last two IPOs in tech. So Reddit went out and Astera. Last year when companies went public, Instacart comes to mind, they had to delay their IPO until they got to profitability. But didn't seem like that wasn't the case for Reddit or Astera. So has sentiment shifted significantly?
I think to a certain extent. I think it depends very much on the company, but still the elements around scale and growth is still very important. So I think if you're a company that is subscale, call it under 200 million in revenue, very low growth factors attached to that, and with no visibility around profitability, it's going to be very difficult to try to get to the marketplace. One thing that is, I'd say, kind of an asterisk to all of that is to the earlier conversation thread around AI. So Astera is a great example of that. They had roughly about 120 million worth of revenue coming from essentially 3 customers. So in most cases, that would be seen as somewhat of a skeptical story. But with AI, kind of everything gets washed clean. So they were able to come to the marketplace and have a fantastic debut. So I think there's a little bit of a dependence on what the factors are for each company, but there are still some things that are steadfast.
Okay, great. Christina, if we can get your perspective on the current climate. You did a SHAKTI Pulse interview with us a few months ago with Liz.
Yeah, that was a funny day because it too was a positive day in the market. And in my pre-interview with Liz, I was very gloomy, and then all of a sudden it was a good day in the market, and suddenly I was in a much better mood. Amazing how that happens. But a lot of things that Michael said are very true, and as you were saying them, I was thinking to myself, but wasn't it always thus? That it is always an individual company evaluation. There's always factors around it. After all, Astera has an intellectual comp called NVIDIA. So if you are a company in a particularly hot space, then some of the rules don't apply. But in general, if you're sort of a more ordinary company, growth will always be a factor. Profitability, frankly, will always be a factor. I mean, this is a little bit of an old-timers game here with some of us on this panel, but I mean...
You're talking about Bill.
I meant Bill, right. Certainly meant Bill. Yeah, certainly didn't mean us. But even in, I go back to the summer of '94 when it was one of the worst technology environments ever, and H&Q, we were able to get done 6 deals. I will also tell you that they filed at 11 to 13 and they got done at 6. So valuation and reasonable valuations and the gap between bid and ask has been the Grand Canyon throughout 2022 and after it all cracked and we've been sort of out of business. It is narrowing, but I assure you that these companies in a bull market would have gone public for much greater valuations than they actually did. But again, boards and entrepreneurs and everyone has to get real about value before bid and ask are going to meet, which they're starting to do.
Ray and Bill, in terms of cycles, where do we put this current cycle and maybe the next cycle, which is the AI IPO wave?
I think cycles is the right word because I think entrepreneurs and investors tend to look too close at a cycle and see it going up, or look really close and see it going down. And that could be a year-to-year thing, where if you step back from it, most of the entrepreneurs we invest in today were in high school in the last down cycle. Literally, we're in high school. And then they grew up and acquired their entrepreneurial skills and maybe their first or second companies while there was free money. So in a very, very different environment, and we've had a very, very long bear cycle until 2021, and now we've hit this. And if you're if you were in high school in 2009 and 8, you're looking at this and saying, "Wow, when's it going to recover? Maybe this year or maybe next year." You're too close. You're looking at it too close, and I think this is going to take some structural change to correct. Right now, we've got, I think, a kind of a large pig going through the snake, and it's kind of around growth investors, right? They've got to, get valuations down. They've got a lot of dry powder, but figure out. They just don't want to invest it right now. They're going to have to invest it, but that's kind of everything jammed up. So while there's still high valuations, certainly around AI, there's certainly investing going on at the seed and A stage. It's just getting jammed up at the growth stage as things are slowing down. Valuations have to correct. And that'll all kind of loosen up, but I think it'll take longer rather than shorter. It's not a 24 thing.
Bill, before you go, just 1 second, Ray, to follow up. You started a couple of venture funds, most recently, Great Point, and you sit on boards.
I didn't start KP.
you were instrumental in running it. What advice do you give to your CEOs in terms of private company CEOs, in terms of managing today with the anticipation of going out in the next cycle? Growth versus profitability, how do you?
So I'll just speak personally. It's not, I think we're all the partners are maybe offering different advice under one big umbrella. So first thing, I don't really focus on IPOs. So tell every entrepreneur, look, if you got a good business, be patient. There'll be plenty of private money to fund you. Even in this environment, there's plenty of private money to fund you until you are ready and meet the qualifications of whatever the public markets want. The public markets want something very different today than even 2 years ago. So you've got to be have a much better balance sheet, a much better certainty of forecast, and maybe profitability, where that was not true just a couple of years ago and kind of hasn't been traditionally true. But I think that's going to be a requirement for a while. It may swing back. Secondly, all of us are saying make cash stretch. Okay, so I don't know of a single company in our portfolio that we haven't kind of taken a look at it and say, okay, with existing cash, you are very fortunate if you have a lot of cash. You raised in 21. This kind of reminds me of 1998 and 99. Those companies that raised, not necessarily the best companies, got through the 2000 bubble burst, but the ones that had most cash did, and maybe they failed later, but they had cash. So having cash, don't waste it. Be very efficient with the cash you have and make it last longer, and see if you can't turn a 12-month runway into an 18-month runway. It gives you options. So that's certainly a very consistent message going out to entrepreneurs. And then there's a lot of insider rounds done, a lot of convertible notes going on just to kind of stretch things out before you have to do an equity round. I personally tell all the entrepreneurs, do not be afraid of the down round. Do not be afraid of it. Look at it, again, get back and don't look at the close up. But if you were like this and all of a sudden went like this and now you're like this, guess what? It's still a pretty good trajectory. How you manage that, what mechanics you manage that through, maybe a note, maybe internal, maybe whatever. But there's a lot of bridge stuff going on right now to get to 25.
Bill?
So I'm going to take a slightly longer perspective. Any of you know me, I'm sort of inclined to do this. First of all, though, I just want to put a stake in the ground. We're talking about IPOs. 80% or more, usually more, of all successful venture exits come by M&A. Historically, the IPO has been the exception, not the rule. But second, I think it's very important to distinguish between the cyclical element of the current environment and the structural. Now, back in Christina's day at HQ, when I was working very closely with Sandy Robertson and Alex Brown and HQ and Montgomery, the four horsemen, plus the fifth, which is actually the biggest, LF Rothschild, Underberg, Tobin, with Tommy, there was this set of intermediaries who were intimately engaged with the venture community, whose livelihood depended on their ability to choose who to sponsor, because after the IPO, they were going to be the market in that stock. They were going to own that stock. And that's how they made their money, more than actually on the spread on the IPO. These guys who ran these firms were not stupid. At the peak of the great tech bubble of the late 1990s, they all sold their firms to big banks. The big banks thought this great, exciting, wonderful world is going on, we've got to be part of it. So they bought H&Q, and Tom Siebel at Montgomery managed to sell his firm 3 times. in one cycle. He was really an amazing salesman and trader. Well, when the bubble burst, guess what happened? The big banks all closed them down. They were a distraction. And the structural change is those IPOs that Christina was running back in the early 90s and through the mid 90s and even into the late 90s, the scale of those IPOs were typically $30 to $40 million, $20 to $40 million of then money. So multiply that by 2, maybe even 2.5, but way under $100 million for the IPO. The companies were often generating 20 to 50 million in revenue. Multiply all of that by 10 times if you want to do an IPO today. And that's the structural change, because now you've got to get the attention of Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, if you're going to get an IPO done. And that is a fundamental structural change. So I'll close with the saying that I learned, that I had drilled into me for years by my psychotic mentor, whom a couple of the guys up here will remember, Fred Adler. Fred Adler had pillows made up with, and Fred was an amazing business analyst, he was a turnaround artist, and he kind of masqueraded as a venture capitalist. Although we did some interesting things together like Daisy Systems. But Fred had needlepoint written into the pillows, which he would throw at his CEO. So if you're thinking about how to deal with CEO, and the needlepoint said, corporate happiness is positive cash flow. When your customers are giving you more money than it costs to develop and deliver what you're selling, you have the ultimate optionality. You can turn down the approach from the big, ugly incumbent who wants to take you over and destroy you. You can, or take you to market at scale, and you can wait for the IPO market. And so everything comes back to what each of these guys have been saying right now. You're in a time, partly because of the structural change, it will not go back to what it was in 1998. You're not going to reinvent those intermediaries. And with the reversal in interest rates, the flood of money from the non-traditional investors into late-stage venture is pretty much over, and it's partly, of course, because of some lunacy by people like SoftBank that, so always have to do too much. That's enough from me, but I just wanted to provide that perspective.
But that's a wonderful perspective. Let's stay on that topic of small cap versus big cap. I think that's a structural change you're talking about. I would love all four of you to comment on it. So I'll give you an example, because look, we're in the venture business where I think what you're saying, Bill, is those days are gone. We're now in a new normal, big cap. But the venture business is all about reimagining and challenging the status quo.
There's one caveat I have to say.
Yeah.
We really, when we're talking about IPOs, we really have to divide the world between life sciences, biotech, medical.
Yeah.
Is Angela still here? I was really interested in what you would say. And the rest.
Yeah.
The rest of tech and consumer and application. Because in fact, since the global financial crisis, since 2009, more than half of all venture-backed IPOs have been for biotech life sciences companies. Never before. It's still only about 20-25% of venture dollars, but more than half of all IPOs. There's no market risk. And you can take a company public in biotech with no revenues. That's still the case. It is a unique, and there's a lot to be said about that, but just I think it's important.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. So going back to the small cap, big cap. So we had a company, Backblaze. This is a company in San Mateo, California. Some of you met the founder who was there last night, Gleb. This company went public in 2022. It had raised $3.5 million in venture capital in its entirety. The company was started in 2008 in San Mateo, in the heart of Silicon Valley. It's a cloud storage company, full stack, tech, hardware, software, and cloud. They went public, stock's doing fine. Founders happy and rich because there was no dilution between the seed round and the IPO. So maybe that's one data point, but the question really for all four of you is, could we get back to the future? Could the small cap IPO come back, and could there be a new type of an investment bank and a new type of IPO buyer who prefers to buy small companies with 30, 40, maybe 100 million in revenue? Somebody made a comment last week, a hedge fund individual, I believe, who said you can't go public unless you have $1 billion in revenue. What do you guys think about that? Maybe, Michael, we'll start with you and talk about the buyers of the IPOs and what are they looking for?
Yeah. I think your comment about kind of the structural differences in the market's a great one, because I think the structural differences as it applies to the buy side have also changed dramatically. On one hand, you have the hedge fund community, which is dramatically larger than it was back in 1994, even 2004 for that matter. And the hedge fund community does have a different lens through which they look at investment decisions. Shorter time frame, oftentimes looking at much more leverage plays in the marketplace, and often liquidity is much more of a paramount concern. So the challenge for them, and it doesn't surprise me that they made that comment to you, a little bit self-serving, but it doesn't surprise me, is from their perspective, when they look at the entry point into a small cap stock, what they're really looking at is how quickly can I exit that position if I need to in a very quick period of time. And the problem with small cap stocks is the delta in terms of price performance on a daily basis is a magnitude larger than what you have in large caps. So for them, they need to try to justify that return profile for those types of positions, and it becomes much more challenging to do so. The other dynamic, which we're also seeing, is the types of buyers that are also coming from alternative funds, so family offices, sovereign wealth funds. They're playing a larger and larger part of the public process as well. But from their perspective, what they're looking for is liquidity, and they're looking to put investment dollars to work in larger cap names. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing the rise of the Big Seven, why you're seeing a much more focus on mid-cap names as well. So where I think there is always going to be a area for specialized investments like, life sciences, biotech. I think when you have like your standard $80 million top line company coming from the software space, it's just a tougher play. Not to say that it can't be done. It's going to be very situation specific. And sometimes what will happen in those instances is the execution element becomes just a little bit more challenging from the syndicate perspective. So that may mean that there's a cornerstone investor that's coming into play. That may mean that there's a smaller float that gets executed. And it may mean that there's just a more very specific investment thesis to that name to actually get a successful IPO in place. Not to say that it can't be done, it's very situation specific, but I think it's just more challenging now for some of the structural differences that we're seeing in the market than it would have been maybe 10 years ago.
In times like the market we're experiencing now, we get very quantitative. We start looking at every single number, and you got to have every number perfect to be able to, and I agree with Bill. I mean, it's always been, I've been in business 25 years in venture business, and it's always been the case that 15% of companies actually go public. So there are many other exit possibilities, but we get very quantitative. There's an emotional side that I think is important as well, is that there's a lot of money sitting on sidelines or sitting in funds or sitting, ready to be pumped through the public markets that wants to be invested and wants to be invested in something that you can feel good about, feel good that I'm changing society, I'm doing something. So they're looking for, even with interest rates as high as they are, said, everybody complained 5 years ago, I can't make any money just leaving my money in a bank or a mutual fund. I make zero, or I make negative. And now that level is probably 5%. And so it's all relative. There will be companies that provide the emotional and quantitative feedback to an investor to say, I can do better than 5%. That will come back. But we've got to move some structural barriers first. We got to get out of this period. The gap between kind of the contributions that go in, the capital calls that go in, and the distributions has never been wider. So the net cash flow of investors is really gone down. So that's what they're looking at. They're saying, maybe I can't afford the cash flows or don't want to put in the cash that I committed to. And venture capital is a long-term game. It's not a way to make money overnight.
Christina, you have a view on the small cap
Well, I do. Even in those days, we called it the trade by appointment only market. So I was H&Q, and we did sell it to JP Morgan, and while the other firms did shut theirs down, we actually never did. I have to give credit to my former employer that they actually stuck with the H&Q group in terms of the smaller things. So it isn't the intermediaries that are the problem. We don't need to have another group of investment banks. It is indeed the buyers. The buyers are just larger, structurally so much larger that the bets that they can place need to be bigger. Therefore, the entity that they're investing in needs to have a broader float. It needs to have more liquidity for, as Michael says, them to have some prospect of getting in and out of these stocks. With all respect to Backblaze, it has, what, a $350 million market cap. The float is a small increment of that, and so any investor that wants to call up, as you see the bid and ask on your screen, you try selling it at that number. The firm will take your order and they will work it over a period of 2 months, and they will come in 3 points below whatever it says on your screen. So liquidity is a huge part of decision making on the other side. When in those glory years of the Four Horsemen, there was a group of people, Joe McNay at Essex, I used to have 10 people on a call, and I could get a deal done. That is simply not the structure now. So no, while there will be exceptions, if you have an exceptional company, you can get an exceptional deal done. You're looking at the person who took Adobe public in a $6 million IPO in 1986 at an all-in valuation of $50 million. So even in that market, that was highly unusual because as Bill said, 20, 30, 40 million was more sort of the midpoint of the size of deals. This was a $6 million deal. So any exceptional story you can tell that, that will sometimes happen. But I noted when Michael said that, used a word of 200 million, if you're below 200 million, or somebody said it, then you're probably, sub-market. Not that long ago, pre-pandemic, I used to tell people it was 100. I mean, you needed to clear 100 in revenue. You needed to raise at least $100 million. So I said, it's kind of, focus on 100 million and then we'll talk. But as everybody's saying, even at someone like me who lived for IPOs, who still is incredibly interested in the market, as these guys are saying, it is not the likely outcome for most venture-backed deals at all. And so it's not something that somebody should put out there as the end-all and be-all, and it can be very miserable being a public company. So I would advise, like everybody's saying, for the entrepreneurs to build a good business, and good things will flow from that. And building a good business involves being profitable. And I said it during the times when it wasn't fashionable, and I'm happy to see it come back because, for heaven's sake, that is indeed the goal that everybody should be shooting for. This business of operating unprofitably forever is untenable at best.
There's another factor that's pushing even more on profitability and positive cash flow, and that is, I think we're already beginning to see it, the Washington push against big tech's acquisition programs. Because, I mean, you count the big seven, they have cumulatively, over the last 10 to 12 years, acquired more than 1,000 companies. Now, some of them have been acqui-hires, but some of them have been businesses like Instagram and YouTube that had real potential for being independent companies. If that exit channel doesn't necessarily close down, but narrows substantially, it's going to put even more pressure on being able to survive and grow and flourish as a cash-positive, independent company.
The other thing last thing to point out is just from a structural perspective, one dynamic that's also changed is from a sell-side perspective, the large investment banks have really focused resources from a research perspective towards the large caps. So going public, getting a company to actually sponsor the actual research analysts that cover the company, that is becoming increasingly difficult if you're subscale.
And so we've talked a little bit about, how few companies actually go public. So we have several of our founders in the room, and I think maybe to leave them with some, green shoots, thinking about the next wave of IPOs. If you're an early stage company, seed, Series A right now, is there anything that if you were talking to a founder, I know, Christina, you advise a lot of founders, that they should be thinking about, whether it's building their board or from a regulatory perspective, that they can actually do at the very early stages?
We're only our early stage, so our sweet spot is Series A, and maybe do a few seeds. So I see the diligence process goes one way. So I see venture capitalists at the Series A and B spending a lot more time on diligence, even when they're out of data. There's no more data to look at. They still want to do more diligence and try to make it risk-free. But I don't see diligence going back the other way. Entrepreneurs generally are shopping for brand and money. So if I can go to Andreessen and get money, or go to KP or Sequoia and put that brand on my... And I always tell entrepreneurs, be careful. You're building a board, and you don't want a board of venture capitalists for a long time. And so try to think about what board you want and how you want that board to support you and guide you and advise you, and try to, you've got to raise money, and unfortunately that comes with probably most times a board member, but think about how you build that board and how you build the structure of your company. Think longer term. And again, if you have a good business, the money will be there. You can get the money, but you can't just simply go out and get the best advisors and the best board unless you work on it and you do the diligence and say, okay, well, maybe this branded venture firm, might be good for my press release, but it's not going to be the best thing for me over the next several years.
Yeah, I always tell them, hire the person on the board, not the firm. The firm is great, and firms with great reputations are great. But in a lot of those situations, you'll get the senior guy supposedly who's going to be on your board, and that doesn't last very long. And now you've got the kid who's never run a business in his life and is supposedly going to, advise you about the elements of your business. Gautam of Gatik was up here before and said, find a pain point. We found a pain point in our customers, and we went and solved it. When I'm talking to early stage companies, I really don't go on about their boards or the brand of the money. I mean, hopefully they'll get money from somebody. I go on more about the product and the market fit and whether it works and how hard it is to do. And so at the early stages of a company, it is all about the product and the market is pursuing and the customer traction. So, if somebody on your board can help you get more customers, that person is more valuable than somebody who can, do some other reputational things. So I just be very careful with that. You do live with those people for a long time, and you live with them on 10 p.m. at Sunday night conference calls. And so it's really not that easy or joyful of a journey a whole lot of times. The whole arc of the journey is fun, but the individual moments are not. So be sure you like them.
I'd say the other thing is be really honest about your product market fit. Certainly all the companies that by the time I see them, our junior investors are passing them through, they get funded by somebody. And one venture capitalist says, no way, we're not going to invest in this company. We don't like this and this and this. And somebody else funds them. And it just can't be possible that all the new companies that are created all have product market fit. In the entrepreneur's brain, there's product market fit. I saw a problem, I'm trying to solve a problem. Make sure the market agrees with you, that the market sees that problem and sees you as solving that problem.
Go ahead.
One last thought. There's a way of thinking about what you guys are all doing and what we as investors are all doing, and that is we're running experiments. We're running experiments. And the question is, first of all, how much does the experiment cost? If we're having an experiment to see if we can build a brand like Amazon, that's going to cost a lot of money. if we're doing something much more narrow, and we know what failure means in that experiment, and we actually have the discipline, if it doesn't work, cut it out, and not just, the biggest risk in the venture business, of course, is the black hole risk. Just another 5 million, just another 10, just another 50 million, just another 500 million if it's 2021 or 2020, 2019, and you've got WeWork on your hands. So thinking about this analytically, product market fit doesn't descend from heaven. It comes by trying things out with particular companies with a particular version of the product and being very disciplined about reading the results.
We had a lot of great people at Oracle in the 90s, and one of them was Tom Siebel, different Tom Siebel.
Oh, yes.
And Tom obviously went on, left Oracle, great salesman, left Oracle. But one thing I really respect Tom for is, as an entrepreneur, currently he runs a company called C3. That company pivoted 3 or 4 times. It started out as a carbon accounting company, going to take advantage of the market for carbon trading. And it's now so different. I mean, it's not even close to that company. And he pivoted until he found what worked. He understands product market fit really, really well, and wasn't afraid to kind of say, we got to start over.
Even changed the name of the company every time he started over. Remember C3 IoT, and now it's C3.ai.
Oh yeah, now .ai. Oh yeah, he's a marketer.
He's also a great marketer and has the best billboards on 101. If you ever drive from San Francisco to San Jose, you see C3 AI. It's changed 4 times, to your point, Ray.
Exactly.
Yeah. We got time for a couple of questions. If there are any questions in the audience, we can do those now. Otherwise, we'll get on and with the next panel. Questions? Great. I think we're running a little bit behind schedule, so we're going to wrap it up.
Yep. We'll wrap it up. Thank you all. And so we've had the investor perspective, and next we'll go to hearing from our portfolio CEOs, not just on the financing environment, but how they're managing and growing the past year. And so we'll call up our CEOs from Ahara, Stable, Kriya, Swiftly for a conversation moderated by our SHAKTI fellow, Natasha Prasad.
And thank you to all of you. And if you can, I think some of them will stay behind. So if you have questions for them,
I have to say I've never been on a panel where there's only one man. So thank you, Cable, for diversity. I know DEI is under a lot of scrutiny, but clearly the last group, you are not an ageist. This group, you're not a sexist. So there you go.
I think this is very representative of SHAKTI and all of the diversity. So excited to kick things off with a conversation with our portfolio CEOs. And as Liz and Cable just said, we're going to be talking about how these incredible entrepreneurs have been managing in a very rapidly shifting environment over the last 4 years, certainly, and especially over the last 2 years. So to kick things off, tell us a little bit about your company, why you started it, and what the environment was like when you decided to dive in and start.
You want me? All right. Hi, I'm Julie Wainwright, and I was the founder of The Real Real, and I left The Real Real, and I ran it until 2022. I started Ahara, which is a personalized nutrition company, because I was working with a nutritionist. Everything she did could have been turned into an algorithm. And in fact, should have been an algorithm, number one. Number two, I've always been interested in how genetics impacts what you eat and preventative health care, and that's really due to family situation. So Ahara is a personalized nutrition offering, and when we got it out there, it runs by an algorithm. The basic level runs on an algorithm. It's called a foundational plan. We do have advanced plan where you can test your genetics, your real age, and also your omegas and D. And then again, the algorithm runs and it becomes a precise nutrition tool. And we're offering nutritional consulting, and anyway, the product continues to be enhanced. So I did this because it's a huge need. Preventative health care has always been ignored, or it's all over the board. So this is something that I knew worked, and we got it out in the market, and I quickly realized that we will get annihilated going B2C. So then the question is, do corporations care about preventative health? is there a corporate market? We restructured things, and we're actually getting, to your point, product market fit, we're actually getting a lot of interest, more interest than I thought, and are closing deals, and we've only been in the market since January as a B2B2C business. So that is tremendous interest because, you know, healthcare kiosks keep going up, people don't want to pay for all the drugs, and maybe food is the answer. Anyway, so what did I do? I had to cut costs. In fact, I actually ribbed cable pretty hard, and you, I might say. I said, you want me to get on a plane and come up here and say, what do? I'll say 3 words. We had to cut, well, 4. We had to cut costs, you know, and we had to keep our costs to prove product market fit in order to stretch the money. And honestly, was it a hard decision? It's always hard because it was a small team. You lay people off, but we had data. We had expensive data scientists. We had expensive experts. The product's built now. Now the advisory team, we always needed a person in the loop. We still do, but we have a great advisory team that kicked in. So cut costs, made the money lost. I want to make sure I can close deals before we go into the market again. This isn't a big, this company isn't going to take a long time to get to profitability because it actually is highly scalable based on what we've already done. So I don't know, it's just good business sense. It's never easy, but it had to be done. And you know, there you go. That's just what you do. And I mean, not only did I cut costs, I cut, you know, my salary went down to like really, really low. And it's like, yeah, that's what happens.
I want to come back to that, and especially comparing with many of the other companies that you've either led to IPO or started, and especially comparing to Ahara, which is in the healthcare space. And so we'll come back to that. Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm Sarah. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Stable, we're a virtual address and mailroom for business. And to give you a sense of the problem space that we're in, we launched in 2020, and we were seeing firsthand like a lot of regulations around how businesses operate were laws that were made in the 1800s. And so today we have these huge multinationals like DuPont and Colgate. But back in the 1800s, you can imagine, were these physical storefronts only doing business where they were located. If you had to get in touch with them, you drop off a letter, right? And fast forward to today, and the nature of work has changed a ton. So work takes place in the cloud. We're spread across different geographies. But businesses still have to abide by those 1800s laws that make no sense. And so you still need a physical address, still get sent mail, and still have to navigate really complex requirements in every single jurisdiction you're doing business in. So Stable is abstracting antiquated requirements through software. And so we're helping modern companies move faster. And we're touching all parts of entity management, so company lifecycle from incorporation to dissolution and in between. Some of the most broken problems is the business address and mail piece, so that's where we started. Today, we work with over 4,000 companies from the earliest stage, just getting started, to companies like Thumbtack, GitLab, and Glassdoor. And so we provide the business address that they use on file with the IRS, vendors, state government, and then of course the byproduct of using the address is getting sent mail. So we also digitize the mail so they can manage it easily online. We've been growing really fast, so despite market conditions, we're coming off of a year 3x revenue and customer count. We also confidentially closed our Series A at the end of last year, and today are a team of just 12 people supporting all of that.
Deb.
Hi, I'm Deboshri. I go by Deb. I'm the founder and CEO of Kriya. Prior to Kriya, I'm born and raised in India, so I came to Carnegie Mellon, studied computer science, was eventually head of product at PayPal, led our entire AI-driven customer success agent platforms. At Kriya, what we do is we essentially do professional excellence with AI. So in a highly competitive market, we essentially help you make you and your ideas look exceptional. So in a few seconds, you enter a couple of keywords and we generate perfectly designed, good-looking collateral. So I got into this really because I've always been a side hustler, so I love creating visual content. have a huge Instagram following, I'm avid Canva user and so on. So it always mattered to me that I show up professionally, whether that's fundraising, whether that's pitching to my bosses or not pitching to customers. And for small to medium businesses, AEs, founders are really, they're short on time. They need to do quick follow-ups and so on. So we play into a space where you get quick, good-looking collateral generated in seconds, all the way from the first pitch to follow-ups to onboarding and implementation. And so that's basically what we do. So we're Y Combinator backed. Cable was my first check. In the environment that I started, we were originally catering largely to the creator economy and more so to the tech creators. So we had over 40,000 people that actually came in and took advantage of Kriya in the last year. And there's a huge wave we took advantage of the tailwinds of layoffs. So a lot of people were anchoring on, let's get our professional presence out there. Let's use this to build our brand and start offering mentoring. And that was like a huge shift. But toward the end of last year, that whole tailwind has dropped a little bit. So we took the opportunity to learn from that, and now we're focusing more on, let's just not focus on consumers and their personal collateral, but let's focus on more B2B. So we're looking at universities, we're looking at sales teams and so on. So that's the focus for this year.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Johnny. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Swiftly. And before I get into what we do, Julie mentioned, how does it feel to be the only guy on this panel? I have a tremendous amount of pride and gratitude for Shakti and supporting a diverse group of founders. And at Swiftly, we're actually over half women on our team. So maybe we can give Keval and team just a quick round of applause, because it's great to see this and supporting women in tech. So at Swiftly, our mission is to make cities move efficiently. We've been really focused on public transportation specifically and writing the software that powers the future of public transit networks. So you think about maybe transit technology over the last decade, there were tens of billions of dollars invested in Uber and Lyft in the ride-hailing industry, then micro-mobility with scooters, and now we see tens of billions of dollars going into autonomous vehicles. And meanwhile, most of the major cities in the world have public transportation, which moves almost 10 billion people per year in the US and almost an order of magnitude more than that globally. And public transit still runs on paper and pencil and these 20-plus-year-old legacy systems. So we're reimagining how those systems can work in a more cloud-native and modern way. We just signed our 159th agency yesterday. And then last year, we passed we became profitable, so we're now almost at 20 million ARR and starting to scale globally as we seek to reimagine public transit.
Amazing. So there's been a lot of change over the last few years. We've gone through a global pandemic, all the spikiness and challenges that have come with that. We've come out at the other side of a pandemic and into a new normal. We've transitioned away from the zero interest rate environment, and now we're seeing the rise of AI. So what are some of the ways in which you've had to adapt your leadership style, your hiring philosophy, your company strategy even, to thrive in this new environment? Deb, do you want to start?
Yes. So as I mentioned, we directly were focusing on consumers. We largely took advantage of the creator economy. We took advantage of the fact that a lot of people wanted to put themselves out there because they were working from home, they had time, there was opportunity for side gigs. It has been challenging since some of that has dropped. Almost more than 50% of our user base has gone back to work, so we start to see some of that dropping. So while we didn't realize that that was a seasonality, it turned out to be so. So the good thing for me has been we were fortunate to have raised a pretty strong seed round. And with that, maybe it's my immigrant mentality, maybe it's just, I'm just generally very frugal. So we kept our team small. We made sure that we were, despite the cash we were bringing in or we raised, our team size has stayed the same. So I think that has helped me, because now what that gave me was the comfort toward the end of last year, is like really taking a hard look at where are we going in the next year, how do we scale, and where do I cut costs. So it gave me confidence that, okay, I have ample runway to be able to start this in a new direction and move from there. So I've just been really thoughtful about leveraging capital and giving all of us on our team that opportunity to breathe and start again.
Anyone else, Johnny?
I was going to say, you know what? We started experimenting with customer service AI, and which has been a good experiment, but someone broke it. I was working with an independent company. Someone broke the code right away, and it started writing random poems. So we still are going to keep them. But I have to say the poems weren't bad, but we're not in that business. So we're going to keep looking at where we can add AI to actually reduce our employee count. And obviously we went back to the firm that we were working with. They're like, no, it'll never go outside your world. Well, it did. So I think that is another way to actually make your capital extend without hiring people, is leveraging whatever technology you can.
And Julie, you also talked about going from the direct-to-consumer selling into
Well, that just made sense. I mean, honestly, when the co-founder actually had a large following and on Instagram and has been a medical doctor focused on nutrition for a long time. When her users didn't convert and everyone had a point of view, I'm like, well, all right, that's it. It's done. So I think I knew it right away. We just had to restructure the team, get everything done, and change some things in the software. That was sort of the bet that you would get X% moving forward. And I'm like, you know what? Our product is more scientifically driven. It's got a great basis. It works. And everyone's got a point of view about nutrition, but not all nutrition ideas are good, especially with the biohackers. I was hearing good biohacker stories out there. So I just went, okay, we're done. We're done with that. We're focusing here, and started changing the product to meet corporate, meeting with different corporations, reaching out to people I know. And like I said, in January it was a full tilt, and even though we're off cycle in some of the benefits packages, we're figuring out ways to win. So I'm excited about that. And our big win was Anthem approved us as, and we're on their, right now we're on their vendor page, which doesn't really get you much except Anthem approved us. And then Coke Industries said, oh, we need something like this. So, you know, it starts building on it.
Sure, happy to. So we definitely, Swiftly and certainly myself, changed how we were managing the company quite a bit last year. We're a bit unique. Our situation may not apply to most companies out there, but we do sell to public transit agencies and to cities. Very small vertical SaaS market. And so we knew that we could try to pump in as much money as we wanted to into growth, but for our specific market, may not be the best use of our capital. A lot of pros that come with selling to government. You get long-term contracts, very high retention, but growth to a certain degree, it's hard to double year over year, especially when you get to like tens of millions of ARR. So we shifted to, I would say, moderate growth and profitability mindset. So last year, halfway through the year, we did some layoffs. I cut my salary too, did some similar things as you, and we gave ourselves basically 9 months to try to get to profitability. We did it in about 5 months, which was great. So we did it by the end of the year. And then moving forward, we've really been focusing on moderate growth and retaining that profitability going forward. And I would say a surprising thing that I did not expect is our growth rate actually doubled relative to where we were a year ago by constraining our focus and just really, I think there's been a lot of talk about solving concrete customer pain points. We got really focused around what matters the most to our customers and kind of blocking out the noise. So we've seen our growth rate increase. We're getting more and more profitable. We hit 5% EBITDA margin last month, and looking forward to continuing that moving forward.
Yeah, for us, it's interesting because we actually didn't shift a lot of how we've been operating. So we've always been really focused on how do we build a good business with sound unit economics. And I'm sure too, so we were in the YC batch of 2020, and there's probably some trauma that our demo day happened to coincide with right as the pandemic was hitting and the markets were crashing. So we always knew that, even in the 2021, 2022, we we didn't take capital at these like crazy high valuations. And we kind of knew that like, it's not, things are not always gonna be great. So we really went heads down and just focused on like, how do we do this as like scrappy and lean as possible? And that was like how we like focus and like still continue to have those values today. And I actually think like because we were so heads down during and not giving into a lot of the noise in that time, like now we're actually able to take advantage of the opportunity of the down market. We're hiring across the board. So hoping to end this year between like 30 to 40 people, so about 3 to 4x our team. And I will say the talent market out there is like, it's a lot easier to acquire really amazing talent than it was in that time where I remember like we were talking to candidates, they were dropping out of our funnel because it was moving so quickly. So I think like in that way, I'm really excited about just like being able to be in a position where we're continuing to invest in our growth, but also still maintaining what that road to profitability, cash flow positive looks like.
I do want to talk about the talent because it's really fascinating what's going on. We did have a really great talent that I had to lay off well, no, we didn't have that many, but with the people I laid off, they didn't want to leave the company. So even though they're not getting a salary, they're working part-time for us, and it's a really interesting phenomenon, I think partly because we're mission-driven, and some of them are actually have moved on to other jobs, but they're like, no, I still want to keep involved, and that's, I wish they would have said that when we hired them. It's like, you don't have to pay me, I'll do it for free. But it's been fascinating letting them go because they're all still adding value. And that's I've never seen that before. Usually it's like, no, I gotta go. And that's created a really amplified what we're doing in a way that I didn't expect.
Yeah, it almost seems like there's a move away from the very transactional, mercenary-oriented approach that was very much the norm a few years ago, which I think is really healthy. Hopefully
a little bit, or we recruited people that believed in the mission. That's probably more.
Yeah. I'm glad you both brought up talent because there's also been an interesting shift over the last year plus in returning to work, right? Big tech has mandated a lot of return to office. Recently, Nike shared on their earnings report that being remote is hurting innovation, and Dell said that folks who are remote won't have the opportunity to be promoted. So how are you thinking about structuring your teams in terms of hybrid, remote, in person? Especially at your size and scale, have you found that it hurts or helps productivity in recruiting?
I can go ahead and go. So we strongly believe that people should work where they want to work and how they want to work. And that looks different for everyone. For some folks, it is remote. For others, it is hybrid. We are a remote first culture. So we have a distributed team across US time zones. That's like really important for us, for a full-time team to overlap in collaboration. But we do have hubs emerging in the Bay Area and New York. So we tend to be more hybrid in those locations. To us though, it is like you have to be very intentional about how you're growing that team. So like we're always thinking about like how often are people, especially across different departments, like how often are they seeing each other? Do they have opportunities to chat more casually? We just got back last week. We did a company offsite in New Orleans. So we do get together in person every quarter. And we do believe that like that mix is like really important to boost team morale, like make sure like people are really engaged, but also just to have fun together and get to know each other outside of work.
I want to comment because I've had employees work for me for at least 30 years, and we're a virtual company, but I would say anyone who's just a new CEO and started a virtual company, you have no idea of the magic that can happen when people see each other every day, and it transcends anything. It makes a huge difference. Creative ideas pop up. It's not just about knowing them and saying and making sure that everyone's happy. It really is a game changer. We're so small now, I wouldn't require people, but I have to say 3 of us do go into the office regularly, and all of changes we've made have come from informal conversations that wouldn't have happened if we weren't just sitting there together. And that, I think, is going to hurt innovation across the board. And I've seen it time and time again. Every big thing I've seen happen at companies I've been at or run have really been sparked by people thinking differently and maybe not even on the topic we're talking about. And I think that's going to really hurt a lot of things. So I am a big one for getting people in the office. I'm also a big one for respecting people's work hours, but I think that this generation coming up, they won't even understand it because they didn't experience it, and it worries me.
Yeah, I'll just, I'm obviously earlier in my career, and I don't have that experience, but I will say I've felt that too. So pre-pandemic, I was very much of the mindset, everyone in the office every day. We tried pretty hard not to hire people outside of the Bay Area. We were all in San Francisco. The osmosis of information was huge. Everyone from different teams, just over lunch, they would be talking, they would be sharing customer stories. We'd be always on the same page with what was happening across our customer base. The pandemic really changed everything. I think the cat's now out of the bag, and it's kind of hard to put it back in. So we have become a remote first company. And I, actually this week I've been working on how to get more people back into the office in the Bay Area. Only about a third of our team is located here now. So it's pretty hard to solve that when your team is geographically spread out over the country and actually outside of our country, outside of the US as well. So we'll probably expand that a bit, at least our San Francisco footprint, to get maybe a third of the company together more frequently, and then see how that maybe can cause some osmosis outside of the Bay Area. But we did also pick New Orleans as our annual get together, so we did that.
Spot.
It was a very fun spot. I was very nervous about it. It ended up being really good, and we're now debating maybe doing it twice a year because it's so valuable.
So, Johnny, you mentioned recently turning profitable, which is an incredible accomplishment. How did you think about growth versus profitability? It sounded in your case that it's actually been really positive on both fronts, but were you concerned about that shift in focus? Do you think it comes with trade-offs? And anyone else who'd like to?
So on our end, I definitely thought there would be a big trade-off. I had kind of gone in with the assumption of we are making that trade, we're sacrificing growth to become profitable. At least as of now, it's been the opposite. Our growth has increased as we become profitable, and I think a big learning for me throughout this, for our market, again, our market's so unique, so I don't know if it applies to everyone, but focus has been a game changer for us. So if anything, I'm trying to drive the company to be even more and more focused. We're only at 20 million ARR. There's a lot of room to grow. And I think we're seeing a lot of value just through that focus. So it's unclear maybe how far we can get by staying extremely focused in a fairly small vertical SaaS market selling to public transit agencies. I think we have several years of great growth ahead. But I was surprised that in our case, was not a trade-off, and actually we were able to raise both.
I actually, to be honest, I think it's a bullshit conversation, and I'll tell you why. And I'll tell you really, sorry, I cussed a little. And I'll tell you why, because different companies have different infrastructures, and one size doesn't fit all. And some companies need scale. So you have to invest. If Amazon would have put profitability first, they would have been out of business. They wouldn't have existed. So the key is, what are the market dynamics? Will they continue to support non-profitable companies? And do you really need to be non-profitable to hit your scale numbers? And at what point do you flip over? But you can have. I mean, I'm glad this guy did his server full stack at 3.8 million. Okay, that's great. But he did make big, so I would say that's great. Maybe he wasn't thinking big enough. And so the question is, what kind of business are you building? What does it take? What can scale? I mean, something like what I'm working on now, it's infinitely scalable at one level of the product. So that makes it's going to get to profitability a lot faster than anything else. When I built The Real, it was a business of scale. When in building that business of scale, it required more capital. And if without the pandemic, it would have gotten to profitability faster. Anyway, but sorry, I was going to say something really nasty, but I'll keep it to myself. But other companies in the space were forced into profitability. And I'll give you an example. One of them was Tradesy. Tradesy it basically became a Walking Dead company. Yes, they sold it to Vestiaire. Yes, they got a return, but it was a Walking Dead company. And it took someone who was desperate, Vestiaire, because they really didn't have anything to offer because they forced them into profitability. They weren't growing. They had negative growth. And so, it depends on when you, and investors know this, when you go to investors, we just heard it. If you're building an Amazon, it's a business of scale. It's going to eat a lot of capital. And now I think the level of sophistication of investors has changed. No one had seen an Amazon-like company back then when it was first funded. And look at, even someone like Tesla, I don't know if you guys know, Tesla couldn't get funding. They couldn't get their B round done. So, and that's definitely a business of scale. That's why I think it's a weird art discussion, because every business and every business sector has completely different dynamics. And then investors either choose to invest in it or not. That doesn't mean that you should never have profitability as a goal, because the economics have to be there. It just means, like, how big is your idea?
How do you think you get your investors, either the ones already around the table or new ones in this sort of constrained environment, to see that rationale, right? Like it's one of those things that feels very obvious in retrospect.
I think it depends on their experience. Experienced investors know what they're doing. There's a lot of inexperienced investors out there right now. And at the end of the day, I'm an investor in funds. If they're not putting my money to use, I want it back. To be honest. So, I've got money in venture firms, and it's like I either expect them to make good investments or not. So I think it's investor by investor, and people do know, but there are inexperienced investors out there, and there's individuals.
And do you have advice for founders who are maybe being pushed to profitability too early, such as the trade C that you mentioned? How do you get to a place where they're on board, they'll support you, or bring in new investors who really get it?
Again, it comes down to the business fundamentals. If The RealReal would have been forced in, it would be a Walking Dead company. And so, it really comes down to that. I think we talked about this too. The other thing that for the female founders, the Harvard Business Review did an amazing study on the words that female and male investors use when talking to female founders, because females emulate males. They don't act differently than male founders. And I would advise you to read that. You're asked different questions. It's from 2017. It's still relevant. So, and I would say they only did male versus female. There might even be another cut for, for age or skin color. I don't know, but they only did male versus female. And so one of the things I did with, I don't know if Cable remembers this, but the board was using words like that right when that study was out, and I sent it out to them. I'm like, you guys, you're like the worst right now. You went from the best to the worst. These are the words you're using. And luckily, everyone, at least did a little self-reflection. But I do think it's an interesting data point, because it does give you another tool to work at if your current investors are using words. But every business has a different, it may be right. It may be right for you to get to profitability, and you may go out of profitability to grow later. It depends.
I was going to say, by the way, I totally agree with everything you said. If Swiftly were a different company, with a different market, I would have made probably very different decisions. In our case, 70% of our entire TAM in the US is in 150 customers. I don't need a team of 300 people going after 150 customers. And the difference between paper and pencil and cloud is pretty big. So with a relatively small investment, I actually think we can have a very marginal increase in productivity for our customers. But yes, it's contingent on our market and our specific situation. Yeah. And I don't think that would apply to everyone.
Deb and Sarah, how are you thinking about profitability and also about other milestones as you look to the next round, as you look to raising again?
Kewal always tells me this. Stop thinking about Series A. Just think about building a good business, and think about making sure that your customers are happy. That true definition of product market fit, that's all your goals should be. Everything else will be dictated from that point on, based on your growth, your strategies will evolve. So I think that is how I'm looking at it. We're trying to be intentional about spend at this point. We're trying to be intentional about the talent that we retain. And that's it. We're just trying to stay really close to our customers.
Yeah, and on our side too, like we've always, as I mentioned, like we've always been thinking about like the unit economics, like how do we really build a great business? And so luckily too, like we're in this place where we've proven out that like it doesn't cost that much for us to acquire a new customer or for us to, like we have physical operations behind the scenes, but that doesn't cost us that much either. So we can really be in this position that we're investing in our growth. And that to say, like, we are also investing in, like, our financial modeling, like, for the first time, like, in the company in, like, a much more in-depth way, because, like, we do think it's really important to always understand what are the different outcomes that could happen, like, what are the different paths that we see, like, by the end of this year, like, this is the steady state, this is, like, our aggressive path, this is, like, our worst case. And so understanding that, because, like, we're on this train right now that, like, our goal is to get to like the next like fundraise milestone, but also like, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty. So what does it take to get to cash flow positive or profitable?
I'm just gonna add one thing. We are a happy, stable customer at Swiftly. Don't double our prices, but you should probably double prices for everyone else.
Give them a carve out, a SHAKTI discount.
As you think about sort of, you talked about kind of the next round, as you think about investors and investor support in this environment as well, how have those conversations been as you've even experimented, Deb, I know, with some different iterations of the product? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and I think it's been awesome for me because I really have 3 investors and all 3 are VCs. And for my skill set and what we do, even from the previous version of the product to what we're doing today, I think our investors have been extremely helpful. Not just because they're giving us their time, but really I think their introductions, their connections are very relevant for the markets that we are trying to enter. So I think I'm fortunate because I mean, ideally if I would have not had some of these, because I only have 3 folks. So I really only have access to 3 amazing minds and 3 amazing opportunities to introduction. So had we chosen a pharma or something like that where maybe one of these investors wouldn't be able to open up doors, it would limit our ability to enter those spaces, so yeah.
And Sarah, one question on just capital efficiency. I know several of you mentioned being very frugal from the outset, and that's part of the DNA. Curious, why is that part of the DNA, one? And Sarah, you got to over 2 million ARR with less than 2 million spent, which is incredibly capital efficient. So how has that helped you? How were you able to do that?
Yeah. I mean, for us too, it was always like we've been very scrappy. Like in the early days, we barely paid ourselves a salary, and so that was just always how we thought about it. Like every single new software that we were going to add, whatever the line item was, like we really did. I mean, I think sometimes probably to a negative, like overthought. Okay, what is that going to do? But it really did like shift the way that we think about building the business and how important it is. Like especially like when you're making the bigger decisions around like who do you really need to hire and like when are you going out to fundraise, what's the timeline around that, and for us too, like a big part of our cost is like launching in new locations and thinking through like the physical operations behind the scenes. So that's always been a part of like what we really think about and like making, and I think like because I remember like in the last talk they talked about how, you know, a lot of us founders, like we were so young in the last downturn. I will, not to age myself down, but I wasn't even in high school at that time. So I think in a different way, didn't even know how good the times were. And so that also, I think, helped us just like really stay steady on what it is like we're building and how do we make an impact there.
Okay, last question before we open to audience. How are you utilizing AI, if at all, in your businesses today?
Sorry, go ahead. We actually took a huge, like it's really helped us. We introduced AI in the previous version of the product about a year ago, and we really saw this whole opportunity to do things much faster for our customers. So the whole new version of the product is largely, like 80% of it is centered around how fast you can do things. And I think Brian was speaking about one of the biggest opportunities for AI is in the productivity space, particularly in content creation. And our job really is to make sure that we make that technology available to people that really need it the most right now, instead of having to go and build custom software for individual requirements. It's been massive, and people are really loving it. Like, we're trying to sell into spaces which is non-tech. So huge female founder communities who are in the CPG and brand space and coaching and consulting spaces, they're actually intimidated by AI. They sometimes don't call it chat GPT, like chat GBD. Like, they're not entirely familiar with it. So giving them access to a toolkit that feels safe, comfortable, and really helps them get their job done faster we feel like we're really adding value there.
I mean, honestly, the AHAR is built as an algorithm. It's all based on machine learning iteration. So that's the fundamental, but that's not generative. But that's, that is the foundation of the product, which is why it's scalable. And I already mentioned our random experiment with customer service, but we'll get there. I posted it online. I'll show you. I'll let you read it later.
Yeah, and I mean, on our front, we're sitting on a lot of data. So like in real time, we know what states companies are registering in, like if they're in a lawsuit. And so we're thinking about it too, of more of like, what is the applications long term of how do we really add value to the businesses that we work with to save them more time, automate more workflows for them. And so that's been like a lot of like where we see the possibilities. And we're very much like investing in like, how do we just continue to grow that infrastructure all across the board. But I mean, on a team basis, definitely day by day, we're figuring out how to get efficiencies in just like our own work. There's some fun, stable songs that people have been making last week. So that's just been like a fun application.
Yeah, and then just getting to, I guess, the nuance of market and industry, I think about AI in two ways. One is internal efficiency, the other is customer value. Our customers are public transit agencies. They are very scared of AI as a term. We use a lot of algorithms to actually predict ETAs when the next bus or train will arrive. So when you open Google Maps or Apple Maps in almost half the cities now in the US, that comes from our platform. Agencies don't think about that as far as AI, but generative AI we have not deployed, just given that fear across our customer base, whether warranted or not. Internally, we've done a ton of tests. So we actually just rolled out Slack's new AI functionality to the entire company, testing Google Workspace, Gemini AI. We bought all of our go-to-market teams Grammarly. So we have probably 5 different tools we've rolled out to either different teams or the entire company to try to drive internal efficiency. But customer-wise, for us, it's a little bit tricky. And if we do roll it out, we probably will not call it AI.
Any questions from the audience?
As somebody who had run my own business and also did a lot of investment research into the company, I want to make some comments on the profitability side. I think there's a difference between cash flow positive and the general profitability. You talk about Amazon. Even in the early years of Amazon, I think a lot of the loss was generated by investments into future expansions and CapEx. But if it is an existing business, it's better to see cash flow positive. So that's a comment I want to make.
Yeah, very true. How about if we save questions for the break and late? So this was great, but I know everybody's going to stick around for lunch. So if you don't mind, we'll wrap it up and then save your questions for.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Otis, Dave, please come on up. And Otis, we got the lights up. Dave can compete with the Golden Gate Bridge view. He can do it. Wherever you want. Take a seat. Thank you. Dave and I are between you guys and lunch, so we'll be entertaining.
We will.
And this is a great guy to talk to you about the journey from zero to IPO. And I know our founders in the audience. This is really your session, so I'll keep my remarks brief and let you guys take over. But just a quick intro on Dave. He's the co-founder and CEO of Upstart, which is a public company. Went public in 2022?
2020.
2020, sorry. After 8 years as a startup?
That's right.
And he had the misfortune of being my boss at Google for a little bit, but has a very illustrious career in Silicon Valley. Started in product at Apple, working for Steve Jobs. Was a management consultant at one point. Worked at a bunch of tech companies. At Google, he's an engineer who also had another misfortune of starting in the sales organization. Became the president of Google's enterprise business. So all the Google apps that we all use today, Dave started that. And then obviously went on to Upstart. So a lot of great stories here. But I want to start, Dave, with an article that you wrote, a post, which is my favorite startup advice of all times. And every year in January, I tweet this post out religiously. So the title of the post is Speed as a Habit. And I'm going to read the first sentence. And it says, so speed as a habit, by Dave Gerard. All things being equal, speed will determine whether your company succeeds or not. All things being equal, speed will determine whether your company succeeds or not. And then later on, he goes on to say, a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week. Why did you say that, and what did you mean by it?
Just so it's clear, that's General Patton that said that originally, not me. So, and I did cite him. This was not a plagiarism thing, but
he did cite it. True.
Simply put, I just think sometimes I'm not a very prolific writer, so I don't write that many things. But through my time at Google and my early years starting my own company, I would just have sort of observe how certain people had this way of pushing things forward really quickly. They just kind of had this urgent energy about them, and most of the world didn't, and just seemed to like sort of go in and out of meetings and out of things, and it sort of just struck me that there's something there that you can teach yourself how to make use of every moment and move more quickly. And so that was just, I wrote that just to said, most business is about making decisions and executing on decisions. That's kind of it. And so it was a little bit of an exploration of how do you make decisions in a way that are helpful. The singular example I do cite in there that I observed at Google, when we were there, Eric Schmidt was the CEO for most of the time. Larry and Sergey were very, very active. Eric could not, run the show by any means. Larry and Sergey were extremely strong and involved in every detail. But Eric was extraordinarily good at making things happen quickly. He knew he could control the process because they didn't care much about that. So you'd see Eric in a meeting and go like, okay, we're going to solve this right today. We're making the decision today, no matter what happens. And those kind of things were really powerful. So to me, when you're a startup, you hopefully get yourself in the right direction, and then it's how quickly you can go in that direction. You're constantly trying to fix and improve and de-risk your business. And time matters more than anything. And to the extent you can make best use of that time and have a sense of urgency in everything you do, your chance of success, given a certain amount of resource put into the business, goes up.
And you talk about making the decision and then implementing the decision. So what is the distinction between those two, and what kind of decisions are okay to make quickly here and now versus some that may be okay to make tomorrow?
Yeah, I think most of the activities you would do in a business, you can, in your mind, think, are we making a decision or are we just executing? And it's maybe useful to separate them. But in making a decision, just the thing that I observed is if you set the rules up front, how important is this? Who has to have input? When are we going to make a decision? That is incredibly powerful because, a lot of things have been written about decision making since then. That thing I wrote in 2015, believe it or not, so it's almost 9 years old. But Jeff Bezos writes about the two-way doors and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of ways of thinking about decisions. But for me, it was about trying to really understand up front how important this decision was, how reversible it was, what information was required to make this decision, and when you were going to make it. And if you sort of thought about those things, you could just invariably make everything go much more easily and quickly.
So let's talk about this in the context of the journey from 0 to IPO. So 0 to 1, product market fit phase. How do you as a CEO apply this framework, quick decision making, hiring the early employees, deciding which product to bid, which customers to sell, how does that manifest itself in that early phase?
Sure. So I'll say we went through we're a 12-year-old company. We went through about a 2-year product market fit, really a giant pivot in the middle of that led to it. But in my mind, the best thing, if I could advise people that are early on, I would say, number one, and someone sort of referenced this earlier, decide what problem you're solving. Make it really clear that you know what problem you're solving. Number two, your idea, whatever this idea is you have for a company, there are a bunch of assumptions laid into that. Write them down and very clearly say, I assume people would pay X for this, or I assume people would prefer A to B. Whatever it is, there are some underlying assumptions about your business that you should write down and write them down clearly. And then as quickly as possible, with as little resource as possible, prove or disprove each of those assumptions. That's it. That's your whole game. And then you change your business, you pivot a little bit, you do whatever. But I think that the whole thing is, I had the great benefit when I founded the company. I really started as a sole founder, and I quickly had 2 people join me that became co-founders. But one of them, I was mid-40s at the time. My co-founder, Paul, was 20 years old. He was in the first class of the Teal Fellows. And when I first met Paul, the first thing I realized is I'm older than his parents. Wow. So that was kind of weird. But in any case, I was like, we were going to try this marketplace-like model for something called income share agreements. And I was like, this is like in March of 2012. I was like, we're going to build this thing for the summer. We're going to launch it in the fall. Perfect time for to talk to seniors, this whole different sort of thing we were trying to do. And then Paul basically said, well, why would we wait that long? Let's just let's just launch this thing next month, and we don't have to build anything. We can do it in spreadsheets or whatever. And that's what we did. And so, it was just a great way to think, wow, why the hell would we wait? Why would we build anything for 6 months? You have to prove or disprove the ideas or the suppositions behind your business as quickly as possible and do it truthfully. I think Ray Lane said there's also a lot of false positives in product market fit, and we definitely had that. We were just dying to see that people wanted this product, this marketplace was going to work. There were enough early signs that we were convinced it was going to work, and ultimately it was false positives, and we ended up pivoting. But it's hard to know that, certainly.
How does the CEO's mindset or just the day-to-day style change as you go from that first phase to then finding revenue and scaling that business model? How did you change?
Wow. Less than you'd think, which sounds strange to say, but when I was at Google, I had a very large 1,000+ person team, and all of a sudden I had a 0-person team. And that's of course jarring, but literally once I had a handful of people I was working with, I felt in the groove. I didn't feel out of place. And for sure there's different skills you have to bring out when you begin to manage a much larger team, and there's not just one team below you, but several layers, this and that. Communication really matters. You just start to realize the impact you have. Everything you do, everything you say matters a lot. And how you spend your time, all these things really matter. But ultimately, I really feel like it's not all that different. Even from when I was doing it at Google to what I do now, I think you do what you do. I feel like I'm intuitively a problem solver. I want to ask questions, find the answers, move on. Somebody said earlier today, you got to celebrate your wins. I'm adamant that you need to celebrate them very quickly and move on. So I'm great celebrating, but that's if that's your dream is to celebrate your wins, you're in the wrong business. Because you should just do it fast and say, hey, that was awesome, but we're just on to the next thing. And that's just the nature of building companies.
Touch on some of the stuff we talked about today, which is this growth versus profitability. Julie made a point, hey, it's not one size fits all. The discussion about the small cap versus large cap IPOs. You went through all of those discussions. What's your lens on those things?
Well, I would say we were relative to anybody else in our sort of cohort, we were very hyper capital efficient, and frankly, not by choice. After our seed round, which we did in 2012, I never got more than a single signable lead term sheet, ever. So I went through Series B, Series C, Series C1, which they wanted to call it for some reason, and Series D, which was our last private round, never getting more than a single term sheet. And so when I read these articles about, oh, here's what you should do when you have 5 term sheets to choose the right investor, I'm like, what? What world are you living in? That's not what 99% of people who are building companies out there are up against. So we were very capital efficient. We raised, as a private company, a total of $160 million. When we went public, we still had about 90 million of it. And so we just weren't, even though we were kind of in this crazy time, we raised 240 million in our IPO. So we almost were like back to the old era of IPOs and capital raising, et cetera. But so we were capital efficient just by requirement. And I think it serves us well. I mean, we just intuitively think that way. We've never just had the chance to throw money at problems. Even today, we don't, honestly. We're a business that just intuitively will never go crazy on stuff like that. And I think in the end, it's a good thing. I do believe overcapitalizing businesses creates horrible habits. And I've not seen a counter example to that theory, so we'll see.
Founders, get your questions ready. I'm going to come to you in a minute. So did you have $1 billion in revenue before you went public?
No, we had over 200 million in our sort of run rate of revenue, but yeah, and we went public for about $2 billion. And just to sort of give you the good, the bad, and the ugly, we went public at $20 a share, which was something around $2 billion. 6 months later, we were for about 5 minutes, over $400 a share, over 30 billion. Today, we're at about $22. So we're above our IPO price, for what it's worth.
Questions for Dave? All right, so I'll keep going. The thing about quick versus slow decisions, how does that apply to hiring?
Yeah, I mean, boy, I've learned a lot of lessons on that, but I think hire slow and fire fast is probably the best simple version of that. One thing I learned at Google that I did come to appreciate, and this was really a Larry Page thing, is hiring out of desperation is a very bad thing. And if you just really, the more you have to have a position filled, the more you're in a danger zone. And you somehow have to get yourself out of that and realize that hiring is really hard. I think when you hire, particularly at executive levels, a 50% success rate is about what you can expect. If you're really good, maybe you can drive that up a little bit. I would also add, because hiring is just so fundamental, I think the single most important aspect of hiring is references. If I could only do one thing between seeing a resume, meeting a person, interviewing a person, and doing their references, I would take the references.
And how do you do a good reference call?
That's a whole art. I might write something about that because I think a lot about it. But first of all, you have to understand relative loyalty of who you're talking to and how much you can calibrate them. The worst scenario is the candidate told you about the person, you know nothing about that person, and they're deeply loyal to each other. So what you can pretty much expect there is they're going to tell you how awesome this person is. Now, and then the opposite is you know this person well who you're going to call, and that person knows them well, but you can calibrate this person and you know they will tell you the truth. That's ideal. Mostly they're somewhere in between, but there is value to be extracted in any case. You can learn. Most humans do not want to lie, so you can just, I like to present neutral things and just, you will just surface something. So you can say something like, we're kind of considering 2 different kind of roles for Joe. And one of them is really sort of deep analytic, he had worked by himself a lot. Another one is much more team-oriented. And which do you think is probably better for Joe? And whatever they answer that question, you're going to learn something about Joe. And it's just different ways to elicit the truth without just saying, what do you think? How would you grade Joe? So there's a lot of important ways you can get truth out of references.
Alex.
With that knowledge of saying okay, I can try to calibrate it and all these things on the references, why is it only about 50% 100% right? Is it your expectations that you're not setting right? Is it, again, not being able to discern when people are, too closely related to that person? What sort of have you seen, like, is the root causes for that?
I mean, the simple answer is humans are incredibly complicated. And I've had cases where there's not a case where I made a mistake where I can't look back and know why I made the mistake of the hire. But I hired 2 CMOs in my history. We have an amazing CMO now, thank God, and she grew from an individual contributor. But I made 2 CMO hires that I undid within 90 days, years apart from each other, many years apart. And in both cases, I thought I had done everything. I spent a lot of time with this person, the intellect, the curiosity, the communication skills, the resume, this and that. And then just almost immediately became clear this person was not going to work well in this environment. So, there's no easy answer to it. I definitely made mistakes, which is why I've gotten to the point. In fact, one of them, here's a classic one that I've learned. Somebody who's been in the Valley for, I've been around here a long time, and they were in good companies, and yet you can't find anybody that knows them. Because, of course, I always prefer backdoor references. That's the truth. You're going to get more truth. And they're like, wow, you were 8 years at Uber and 4 years at eBay and 6, and I can't really find anybody that knows you? That's just weird, right? So that's just, there's just signs about that sometimes. The other thing I would just say is, it is so easy to fall in love with a candidate that you will stop listening and stop looking for the truth, particularly if you put references at the end of the process, right? So you're like, oh, thank God, I am almost done with this search. I just need to talk to these 3 people, and God help me, I'll have somebody in the seat in 3 weeks. And you're like hardly listening because they're saying, oh, Joe, my God, Joe was incredible, right? You're not even trying to find the problems. So I just think that's where it all falls apart.
Johnny?
Yeah, I think the way I think about running my company is ideally I have a team of people covering each facet, my direct reports, each of them being better at what they do than I am at what they do. And I am merely trying to sort of guide and direction and ask questions and nudge them in certain ways. I prefer not to make decisions. Sounds funny, but if the teams can just really operate well together, make decisions, great. I'll be glad to just sit and listen, right? So I do have this way of just thinking about, I'm observing this machine in motion, and I want it to work really well. And I think I have a vision for what I want it to look like in 5 years. And so I'm just kind of processing through that. Now, your team's not perfect. There are things that you can see that others might not see. So I'm not really that passive at all. But I think that's how I think about it, is the more successful, the more capable the company is, the less they rely on me to do almost anything. So I'm really about looking beyond the horizon. I'm really trying to figure out, are all these people, is this an A team, or is there some issues in some of these teams? Are some of these people pushing harder than others? And so it's really just about that. It's coaching a team and hopefully being in a place. If you're like, I went to a first round capital dinner. I sit next to a CEO of who is now, no, they're not public yet, but they're very well known. And he was going like, he was losing his mind about how so much things were going on in his company. He couldn't believe it, this and that and the other thing. And his board was calling him and texting him. And I was just going like, is he doing the same thing I'm doing? Because I just didn't feel that. And I think he had just thrown together a company, and I don't know. So maybe I was lucky I started this in my 40s and I had a little more experience behind me to do this. But I think every CEO comes at it differently. I have some advantages, though. I'm sure there are a lot better CEOs than me out there who who just drive things much better than I do.
Is there a question back there? Go ahead, Bill. Okay, mic's coming your way.
This kind of takes me back to the in the office versus remote issue. I always found, and I wasn't running a company, I was running a team, but the ability to calibrate the team was really a function not of the formal review, what you're doing, you know, pipeline review, portfolio review. It was walking in somebody's office, a little the Andy Grove style, and just sitting down and saying, what's wrong? Of course, if the answer is nothing's wrong, then you say, are you awake? You're in the venture business. There's always something wrong. But that kind of informal occasion where you're not trying to come up with ideas, but you're trying to read your people and get from them a sense of what you should be aware of, but also about how they're processing their job. I don't see how you do that remotely.
Well, it's a good question. We've made the migration. You know, first 6 or 7 years of the company, we were on one floor, one office. We didn't even like to be, I mean, we'd like to be able to just yell someone's name across the room and it was good. We made a big decision, what we thought in 2018, to open a second office in Columbus, Ohio. So we suddenly was really to access more talent. And in COVID, we, through a bunch of iterations, got to the point where we said, guess what? We're going to be what we call digital first, which really means remote, but getting together on a regular basis in very important ways. And the trade-off we decided was, first of all, in-person time is valuable, but the quality matters more than the quantity. We didn't necessarily have to see each other every day. There's tremendous advantages to the flexibility of remoteness. And number two, and the overriding factor was, we could hire talent anywhere in the country. And for us, we're very focused on machine learning engineers, which of course in the Valley was so hard to hire such people. When you can suddenly hire great talent anywhere in the country, the world opens up to you. And so that was the trade-off we made. I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily start a company that way. I'm not even sure the first 50 people in the company I'd want to do that. But for us, that trade-off became very obvious and we would never, ever go back. I mean, we don't have a choice. That was sort of a one-way door because we have people in almost all 50 states at this point.
Akshay?
Obviously, if you do your reference check right, you're going to find somebody's strengths and weaknesses, right? What weaknesses are you willing to kind of accept along with a specific hire? And one of the other questions I have is, what are some of your go-to questions to kind of suss out the quality of a candidate in a reference check?
You know, I don't know if there's certain weaknesses. I will just generally say that I don't tend to care very much if they've done this thing before. Like I'm more trying to assess whether this person is curious, can attack problems, is self-learner, can adapt, is a good communicator, works well with other people. Like have they done this problem before? In the end, it almost doesn't matter. Because we're always doing totally new things. No matter where you come from, you probably haven't done the kind of things we're doing here. It's just, so for me, it's more about just the capability of that person to learn and adapt and contribute and communicate as much as anything else.
And what are some of the questions you ask in your references? I think he gave one example earlier about a sort of a situational.
Yeah. I mean, one you can always do. Again, most people want to tell you the truth no matter what. So I will say, I think a very good one to say is this person in the top 20% of people you ever worked with, 10% or 1%? And, you know, if they say 20%, you just have to worry because that's going to be an inflated grade. And, you know, so another thing I would do is say, you know, would you hire Sally again? And they might say, well, yeah, I probably would. Well, what would be a time when you might and when would it not make sense, right? You're going to learn something from that. And they're going to probably tell you something, especially because they haven't thought through that. They well, I guess. So that's the whole point is you're trying to surface this like balance sheet of positives and negatives because everybody has them and you just want the fullest picture of what you're walking into. And generally speaking, the lack of adaptability to me is the real killer. It's the person who's so confident in their experience, so knowledgeable in their trade, that they feel they have nothing to learn. And that is one of the most dangerous types of leaders to bring into your company.
Two tactical questions. I think most CEOs go through these choices. Hiring or selecting your first board member, who's, let's say maybe it's not an investor, independent, and then a chief of staff. A lot of CEOs, even early stage CEOs, think about that role. How did you Did you have, I mean, obviously you're a board member, did you have a chief of staff, and how did you think about both of those roles?
Well, just quickly in the board member, I mean, I have a friend who's a multi-time successful founder, and he basically says, if your board doesn't do destructive work to your business, you're ahead of the crowd. So like he set the bar very low for what to expect out of a board. So I was like, okay. And there's a little bit of truth to it, meaning like, you can't expect your board to build your business for you or help. I mean, they can help at the margins, but it is on you. And you shouldn't expect that your board, who has a million other things they're doing, and this is not, they don't live or die by it like you do. So you're always in a better place, I think, if you lower expectations that your board is gonna be the decider if you're a winner or loser. Having said that, having a great board, a supportive board, in the early stages, earliest of stages, I would just say, somebody who's experienced and empathetic. That's what you need. Experience meaning you're gonna, especially if first-time founder, you're gonna hit all sorts of things you've never seen or heard of before. Somebody who can at least help you navigate a little bit and has empathy because it's very lonely, particularly in the early days. Chief of staff, I don't understand it. I honestly don't. I've never had one. I've never wanted a chief of staff. I don't understand it. It's completely counter to what I do. I have like 9 or 10 people that work for me directly. I have an assistant that helps me with all sorts of logistical things, but I don't, there's nothing about how I operate that makes me think I could have someone sort of, I don't know, representing me in meetings or whatever they do. It's just not in my frame of reference. So I apologize to those who either are a chief of staff or have one, but I don't understand it. I never really have.
So say more about that. You don't understand it because you think that role can be filled in a different way organizationally, or talk more about it. Did you ever consider?
Well, maybe I'll put it back to you. Tell me what the main function of a chief of staff is.
Well, so I mean, by the way, Harvard has written a whole paper on what a chief of staff looks like and 5 different variations of it. But there are a lot of companies that hire a chief of staff. A lot of our founders ask us for advice on that.
I guess I'm my own chief of staff. I don't know. I mean, again, I just think of this model where I got 10 different parts of my company. I have to think about them. I have to work through them. But I don't.
So you don't believe
I can't
in
grasp
that. All right.
Well, maybe it's just, you know, before I ever had an executive assistant, I also thought, why the hell do people need assistants? It's kind of crazy, right? Now I kind of go, oh, well, I get it. So I don't mean to claim I know everything about this. Just I've never had a chief of staff, and I think I would be perplexed of what I would do if I did have one. So.
All right, that's great. Any questions? All right, Bill.
There's one subject, I don't know if it's appropriate here, there's one subject that actually has not been raised over the last, whatever it is, 3.5 hours, and that is the question of the 2 tiers of stock and the entrenchment of founder in perpetual governance control. Obviously at Google it worked. We've seen some other places where it didn't. It obviously worked at Facebook. But I wonder about how you guys think about it. As a venture guy, how you think about it with respect to your portfolio, your prospective portfolio companies.
Sure, we never had any kind of 2 classes of stock. I didn't pursue it. I don't know whether we would have had, I think you have to have a lot of strength as a company, meaning like the investment bankers will go to battle for you and you'll get great investors even with it, because I think, of course, governance-wise, it's perceived very negatively. I didn't pursue it. I've just kind of always felt that, look, I'm the founder, I started this thing. At some point, I might become incompetent enough that they do need to get rid of me. Like, I just don't have this, like, self-image that says, you know, I will always know what's right, and the world is just going to follow my direction. I don't have that. I will at some point probably, you know, not be the CEO. Probably my much younger co-founder will become the CEO. And to me, that's a natural process. So I didn't want it. I don't know if I could have had it regardless, but I certainly can see in some places where it makes sense. You have a very complicated business. There's a long-term vision, and having it disrupted along the path can be bad. But I'm more skeptical on it, I would say, than most.
Bill, my view on that, the approach we have taken is that we are backseat passengers in the car, and the founders are the drivers. So whether they have complete control of the company to dual stock structure or some other way, the decision that we have to make is, do we want to get in that car or not? And that decision is made before we write the check. So once we write the check, whether they're in control, defect, or de jure, it doesn't really matter. We're in for the ride. So it has not been relevant. One more question, we got to then split for lunch. So Chris, go ahead.
Dave, now you got your successor in place. If you were to start another company, what company would you start, and what areas sound interesting to you?
I'm done.
Hey, I'm an upstart shareholder, so stick around, man.
I just mean I won't be starting anything new. I'm completely dedicated to what I'm doing, and even though starting a company in my 40s was late, I'll be 60 before I'm done with this one, and but we're in the AI world. We're deeply into it, and I think it's going to be a run for 10 or 20 years of fascinating things happening in this domain. So, while the sort of sweet spot right in the middle of generative AI to me is going to be heavily crowded, there's so many different areas where I think it'll be exciting. And I think a lot of even though I don't know that much about it, life sciences as it mixes with AI is just truly fascinating potential. So to me, I like to just read about that and keep up on that.
I got one last question for you. So Dave, besides all of his glorious things he's done, he's also been grateful to us, and he's a SHAKTI Titan LP in the fund, so thank you. What advice do you have for us, for Liz and I, and for our community as we are a startup in our third year and build this platform? What should we do? What can we do?
Well, it's a great community you clearly have here. I mean, the diversity of it is very powerful. Just the different ideas, the different types of personalities, I can just tell it feels different than you'll typically see these meetings. And it's also not so U.S.-centric, I think, which is another thing we'll often see. So, I think just keeping that ethic of amazing people brought together, connecting them to experienced people that can help them along the path. It's just a great formula. And so I'm very grateful to having known Cable for a lot of years now and being part of this. And I'm Dave at Upstart, by the way. If anybody wants to reach out, I'd be happy to help you any way I can, because just being part of this is great, and I'm grateful to be here. So thank you.
Thank you. This is the reason why we do what we do. It's to hear from people like him, not from Liz or I. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for giving us the opportunity. Lunch is next door. We're all going to stick around if possible, ask questions, have conversations. Thank you to all of the people behind the scenes who helped us. Nancy, amazing. Nancy used to also run marketing at The Real. This is not her full-time job, but thank you for doing that. Otis and the team in the back. Jim Fulton, if he's still here. Jim Fulton, who runs Cooley's New York office, basically wrote the book on venture capital at Cooley in Silicon Valley, has been my mentor for 20 years, so thank you, Jim. Professor Jerry Ingles here, the Cal hat, my professor for 27 years ago. So Jerry, thank you. The reason I bring this up is because we're trying to build a platform that is really about the community, about you folks. And we've been very lucky to bring people from our lives that go back 2-3 decades. So thank you for that. Enjoy the rest of the program, which is the food, and hang around if you can. Thank you, Dave, for doing this.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming.